You ready for this, Kyle? A Department of the Interior IG report which said not only were LRAD DEWs authorized for use in Lafayette Square on June 1st of 2020, they were in fact used, and that people were running away screaming and confused. What I saw on January 6th, I saw three different types of people that day. I saw bad people doing bad things. I saw good people doing good things. I also saw otherwise good people doing some really stupid stuff. We also had three people whose heart stopped in a very small space, less than 100 yards apart from each other. What we know, in quick review, is that elements of our military were present, embedded in the crowd on January 6th. We know beyond any shadow of a doubt that the tactical units of every three-letter federal agency was in and around the Capitol. They were frickin' in the building already. The prosecutors did not inform defense or the court that both of those guys had been disciplined for telling lies. Let's get it all out there. Let's get the truth.
All interviewers have their own style, and my style is to try to get to the point and to be intensely curious. And the key to interviewing is listening.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth, because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the Sunday Conversation. Really appreciate you joining me over here. It's KyleSeraphin.com. If you're watching on locals, you can find us at rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin, always on X and on YouTube, Spotify. It's the Kyle Seraphin Show at Kyle Seraphin. So what we've been trying to do is do profiles of January 6ers. Steve Baker's a kind of a special case. As you guys saw, we're going to be talking about what happened on January 6th, very specifically from an investigative journalist perspective. Steve works for The Blaze. He's an investigative journalist over there for the last couple of years. He's been doing this full-time since January 6th, maybe even going into 2020. I'm going to let him tell his story a little bit, but we're not going to get into who he is as a man nearly as much as we did previously. So if you want to see that, you're going to have to go back in time. Check out the Kyle Seraphin Show first interview, which was a two-part series that went like 3 hours as well. Steve and I talk quite a bit when we get together. He's got a lot to say. He's a very interesting man, worked behind the Iron Curtain, helped bring down the Soviet Union in his own way with a trumpet and strip search by a KGB captain. If you haven't heard the story, it's worth checking him out. So our programs are brought to you with very little commercial interruption. I don't want to do a ton of spots in the middle because it really does break up the flow of what we're doing. So we're going to do just one. Our friends over at Patriot Protect. And you'll think, hey, Kyle, I haven't heard that before. Yes, they are new. It's Patriot Protect. Folks, you can get to them by going to kyle.patriot-protect.com. You'll see the website down there below. They're a powerful security service. They offer something that most people don't do online. They get rid of all the stuff that you ought to get rid of. They have a search and destroy protocol that basically scrubs all of your information and personal data from these websites so that you're not being traded around, so people can't find you nearly as easily. And it does help you eliminate a lot of the scams that are out there. All right. Once they've eliminated you, they're going to keep monitoring. And it's a 24/7 protection. It costs you about $5 a month with an annual subscription. If you haven't taken any action to remove yourself, then you are going to be on public databases. I guarantee you're exposed. Most of you can go find yourself on Google. And if that's the case, you're out there. It's a fast setup. It only takes a little bit of time. That's the upside to it. You could become basically invisible to most criminals who are at least lazy enough to be able to try that stuff. You're going to block scammers. You're going to secure your location in your home, protect yourself against debt collectors, phishing, identity theft, and more. Use promo code KYLE. Again, I'll put the website up here because we're only going to do this for the first few minutes here. It's kyle.patriot-protect.com. A little bit wordy, but it's actually really easy to remember. kyle.patriot-protect.com. Use promo code KYLE and you'll save yourself 15% off an annual subscription. It's the best way to get it done. I've done the same thing myself. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the results. I actually haven't been noticing any robocalls or weird calls, and I tend to get a fair number of them. I have more than one phone sitting here on the desk with me. So check them out. Okay, without any further ado, without any sort of prep, let's jump into talking to my friend, Steve Baker. My guest today is Steve Baker. He's a friend of mine, so it's a little bit easier. It might be a little bit harder as well. Steve and I have known each other, and the only thing that limits our conversations, as we just said a second ago to each other, pee breaks and cell phone connectivity. Steve, welcome back to the program.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really well. Okay, I want to play a little game with you. You ever do any role playing?
Well,
let's outside of the bedroom role playing.
Okay, all right. We can go forward.
Okay. When I used to be a paramedic, one of the things we would do is you'd pretend you're somebody, the victim is somebody. So you'd have a friend of yours who's 19 years old. He would pretend to be a 38-year-old woman with abdominal pain, right?
All right.
I'm a person that you've never met before at a social gathering. And I want to know how you introduce yourself to people that have never met you, because I know too much about you to do that.
If I'm at a social gathering, it's like, I'm sorry. Can you show me the restroom real quick?
That's what you're doing. You're running to the toilet.
Right. No, I saw one of these video reels this morning. I mean, early. It was, where a guy walks up to a group at a party. Like it looked like it was New Year's Eve. And I'm not going to repeat what he said, but basically, he said something that sounded like, it was one of those things where, oh God, I'm trying to avoid going blue here, but let's just say he said something that was very inappropriate related to his, man unit, and to this group of three hotties in the, the bar. And then when they were shocked and they said, "What did you say?" And then he said back a completely different phrase where every word rhymed with that. But with the loud music, he could back off from what they thought he said.
Yes.
And by so doing, that was his his opening line. And he totally won. Within seconds, they're all wanting to dance with him.
That's like an Austin Powers kind of blind.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, do you do things like that? You're a trickster. You've got a great sense of humor. Yes?
I do have a sense of humor. I'm a little darker, a little more dry than that, though. I'll be honest with you. I've never been a bar guy. I do not pick up women in bars. I just don't. It's never been a thing of mine. I don't like to do it. Come on.
I just found the title for this episode, by the way.
It's the worst. It's the worst place to do that. It's even worse later in the night when you're, when all of a sudden, the big women start looking good. So it's not something that I've ever been keen on.
That's really fair. So the title of the episode is Steve Baker, I Don't Pick Up Women in Bars.
There you go.
That's what we're going for. Okay. So you used to be a musician though. Do you call yourself a musician when you meet people today? Do you still define yourself, or has the last couple years changed?
I do. I haven't played a show, and now it's over a year because my last show was December 8th of 2023. And I'm a singer. I'm a trumpet player. I was packing up at the end of the gig. It was a big holiday event for Duke University last year here in Durham, North Carolina. And as I was packing my trumpet and my flugelhorn into the case and taking it apart, and I looked at it, and it was very bittersweet, nostalgic, emotional moment for me, because as I'm putting it in the case and taking the mouthpiece out and putting it in its little leather case, I asked myself, is this the last time I'm ever going to do this, after having done so for more than 50 years? And that case is sitting on the other side of this wall right now, hasn't been opened since that evening, December 8th of 2023.
So how do you make your living now?
Well, Blaze Media has been very good to me for the last year and a half. They provided the opportunity for me to do that transition, as you and I have talked about before, where I moved. It was during the COVID lockdowns that I made the actual intention. Me and my best friend, we call it reinventing our lives, after 50. We'll just go with 50 for now.
That's fair.
And reinventing our lives in a way that was unexpected, but it wasn't like it wasn't already something that was important and a significant part of my life, because it had been for 25 years. I'd been writing, particularly doing political analysis and the odd investigative journalism thing for a very, very long time. But during the COVID lockdowns, that was the time when I felt like that the government had actually weaponized me against them. And, when 2 weeks to flatten the curve became 2 months, and it was apparent that it very well could be 2 years, that they were not going to allow me to work because, as you know, the music industry, we were locked down. We were shut down. That was, I played a couple of illegal shows. I did. Like speakeasy kind of things. We played a couple of private events inside people's barns, out in the middle of nowhere where the sheriff wasn't enforcing lockdowns. And then we, tried to find the odd drive-in theater gig. Yeah, I mean, seriously, you set up a stage in front of the big theater screen at a drive-in, and people pull in with their cars and listen to you from their cars. Literally on the radio, you dial into your, if they didn't want to roll their windows down. And so we, I probably played about 3 of those. You can't make any money doing that, but nevertheless, just to keep active. But it was during that time, after about 2 months of the 2020 lockdowns, that I switched seats, as I like to say. I moved my journalism into the pilot's seat of my life, and I moved my music to the co-pilot seat. So fast forward 3.5 years from there, and Blaze Media came into my life and brought me on as a contributor. Then the last year ago, or I guess it was 2.5 years, whatever. Then this past December, well, I keep forgetting that we're now into 2025. I have to go back to 23. So in December of 23, they actually made me an offer to come on as a full-time correspondent with them. And that is what facilitated me feeling comfortable to allow the music to go, because that's how I made my living for most of my adult life.
It's kind of wild. You use the word weaponized, right? What does that word mean to you? Because we've heard it in the context of government, and we've heard it now in the context of you against the government. What does it mean?
Well, it means something very special to me now, because my judge in my own January 6th case used that word against me in my my trial date hearing. See, I chose not to go to trial. My pre-trial hearing was the day after Trump won the election here in November of 24. And he was, let's just say that my judge was not a happy camper. He was obviously butthurt because of who won. And I mean, I'm quite being literal about that. And there were other factors related to my judge. My judge, coincidentally, maybe, the officiant at his wedding was none other than Merrick Garland. So let me just
say that one more time, would you?
Yes. The guy who married my judge, Christopher Cooper, is the existing Attorney General, Merrick Garland, the guy overseeing all of these prosecutions on January 6 cases, including my own. Mm-hmm. So he's also the same judge that held Catherine Herridge, then of CBS News, in contempt because she defied a court order to turn over her sources on a story that she was working on. And he held her in contempt. That was only 2 weeks before I was arrested back on March 1st of 2023. So, 24. Sorry, this change in years got me messed up. Yeah, 2024. So that was we both could be coincidental. It could also be coincidental that this is the same judge that told Dr. Simone Gold in her January 6th sentencing hearing, and this is an exact quote from her sentencing hearing. He said, "January 6th is about a lot of things, but it ain't about the First Amendment." To which, Your Honor, I would disagree for about 99.998% of the people there that day. Misguided, misdirected, uninformed, misinformed, ill-informed, or greatly informed, whatever status they held in terms of their reason for being in D.C. that day, it was 100% about the First Amendment.
Let me ask you a couple of kind of rapid fire questions.
Yep.
Who does the First Amendment protect?
Who is it supposed to protect?
Well, let's just do it as it's written. What does it say?
Well, it's supposed to protect you and I. It's supposed to protect this function that we're engaged in right now. It's supposed to protect that 200 to 400,000 people that showed up in D.C. that day to air their grievances and present those grievances before Congress, to stand outside that building and shout to the top of their lungs.
Do they need a permit for that?
No, there's no license required.
Is there a qualification in the First Amendment for who is protected and who's not?
No, there is not a qualification. And in fact, despite the fact that there's no permit needed, there were 82 permits issued that day, 82 First Amendment permits issued, 6 of them on the Capitol property, issued by the Capitol Police leadership themselves.
Mm-hmm. And the text says freedom of the press. Who's the press?
As a matter of fact, even your former agency, the FBI, recognizes pretty much anyone who has a amplifier of any kind. It can be a pamphlet, you are the press. It can be a podcast, you are the press. It can be a blog, you are the press. More tellingly, they even recognize social media influencers as the press.
Did they know that on January 6th, or is that a new prescription from them?
I don't think that 99% of Americans realize that a social media influencer is recognized by the Department of Justice as a actual member of the media,
which would make them a SIM,
a
sensitive investigative matter under the FBI's governing dialogue.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened to me.
So you were treated as a sensitive investigative matter, and then you were arrested. What were your charges?
I got what they call the 4 basic misdemeanors, like hundreds and hundreds of January 6th defendants got. I got the 4 basics. It's always typically only one of them is actually true, maybe 2. I mean, if you technically went inside the building or crossed over into restricted space that day, you were technically guilty of the glorified trespassing charge, which is entering and remaining in a restricted area. Mm-hmm. If you carried a flag and whooped it up and hollered and sang the national anthem and chanted, whose house, our house, that kind of thing, then you could have been actually technically guilty of parading and picketing inside, the Capitol building. As a general rule, the other charges are just there to stack on to frighten the defendant into a quick and easy plea deal so that they can move on, get the notch in their gun belt and move on to the next victim. And those are like abusive language charges and, things of that nature. Getting, the other 2, apart from the glorified trespassing charge and the picketing and parading charge, the other 2, they've got a whole, quiver full of arrows that they can use to get you up to the basic 4.
Were your charges similar to J.D. Rivera's?
Yeah, almost identical. Yeah.
And was he pressed on that day?
He was 100% pressed that day. I mean, he was actually performing the work as a contractor for a mainstream television station out of Mobile, Alabama. And more importantly than that, unlike Luke Mogelson, he didn't walk in there with, quote unquote, his cell phone as his reporter's notebook. JD went in there with the big professional gear.
Yeah. So how did we get into a world, just if you were to reflect back, how did we end up in a world where some press is more equal than other press in the eyes of the DOJ?
Well, in my case, it was just basically my expression of narrative not comporting with the approved narrative that, as Nancy Pelosi was famously recorded as saying, that she wanted to make sure that the January 6th committee and that all of her commemorative events on the first anniversary of the event would, and this is a quote, would establish and preserve the narrative of that day. Now, allow me to say that again. She wanted to be sure that all of these things and these structures that she was putting in place to investigate January 6th would establish and then preserve the narrative of that day, quote unquote. And my observations did not comport with the preferred narrative of that day. J.D. Rivera never had a chance to express his. J.D. Rivera was guilty of one thing and one thing only. That was being an activist with the Latinos for Trump organization. So he was guilty before he got there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's no more complicated than that. He comported himself on the day as a consummate professional. He didn't do anything that Luke Mogelson of the New Yorker didn't do. They went through the same broken window. The only difference between Luke and JD was carrying professional gear. Luke had press credentials and hid them so that he could blend in with the crowd, admitting so in his own book. In his own book, he confessed to a crime.
What was the book called?
Oh gosh, I don't recall the name of it, but it's Luke Mogelson. It's basically his day. His article that he published in a week later in the New Yorker was called "Among the Insurrectionists." So he got the right title to keep it. That was his get out of jail free card. He didn't need a press pass.
Is it pretty clear, or would you assess it to be the case that if you aligned with the political left, then you got to get out of jail free card? Are there any examples that sort of flout that?
Yeah, there are a couple of right-wing examples of people that we know. Richie McGinnis, he's a riot chaser, well-known riot chaser. Really got in. He didn't commit any crimes that day. He went other than he went in the building, which, by the way, a press pass does not grant you access to a restricted space. That's the other thing that 99.99% of everyone doesn't understand, especially all of the quote unquote social media influencers that love saying to people like me and JD, you didn't have a press pass. You didn't have a press pass that day. It didn't matter if you had 10 press passes hanging around your lanyard. None of those are permission or license to enter a restricted area without express permission from law enforcement, period. That's journalism 101. And the mainstream journalists who have been to school and been through that and learned that, they are more guilty of a crime than those who are ignorant of the crime. And you know that yourself. There's no such thing, that whole trope about ignorance of the crime is no excuse. Oh, first year law student will tell you that's bullshit.
It's certainly a mitigating factor.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
So that you're, and what is the usual technique? What do people usually do? Do you ask a cop, "Hey, can I go in here?" Or do you follow and ask for forgiveness later?
You do exactly like I did in Chicago this year at the DNC when they had a cordoned off area in front of the Israeli consulate, and in fact anticipating clashes with either Antifa or radical pro-Palestinian elements that were in the crowd, that were going to be in conflict with the pro-Israeli protesters. I was there to cover that, and there was a cordon off police area, and I flashed my badge and said, "Can I get through here?" And the cop looked at my congressional press badge, and he opened the gate for me and let me through. Now, had anyone done that at any of those doors or those windows, had pulled their badge out and said, "Officer, I'm a member of the press. Can I go in to cover this event that's happening at the Capitol? It's historic," and they waved them in. Well, surely, I don't care left or right, you would have been prosecuted for that. But 99% of the people that went in that day, and we've already had on a spreadsheet over 80 now. Of these 80 that we have on a spreadsheet that went from the from the outside to the inside, it is a spreadsheet. But as they moved from the outside to the inside, these journalists, regardless of classification, it doesn't matter whether they were mainstream working for New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Reuters, AP, French television, British television, wherever they were from. These people didn't stop and ask cops. They didn't stop and show them their badge. They just moved in with the crowd like all the others did. And that includes, by the way, on this spreadsheet, social media influencers, podcasters, and bloggers. About I would say roughly 40% we are absolutely sure of did not have press credentials either. But they've not been prosecuted because their narrative, was, let's just say it more in line with Nancy Pelosi's preferred established and preserved narrative.
I'm going to take a quick step back. I think everybody, when they have a retrospective, you mentioned being over 50, so you got a couple of years under your belt that you can reflect on. Tell me some of the transition points in your life that you think, my life could have gone one way, I took a fork in the road, and it went another way. And where does January 6th fit as far as significance in those types of transitions?
I mean, the biggest transitionary periods in my life by far was when I left school after college, after a year and a half to go on a road with a band. This band ended up being a band that toured internationally. I went behind the Iron Curtain with them. That had a significant impact on my vision of my worldview. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say it had a significant impact on my politics, but it refined it by fire, traveling around the world in the manner I did and seeing and literally living behind the Iron Curtain for extended periods of time. And then the next probably big, transition point would be, getting married, having kids, variously bouncing back and forth between being a performing musician and being in the business of music. You eventually, when you get a family, you've got to feed people and put a roof over their head and that sort of thing. So I got more into the business of music, was making much more money there than I ever had as a performer. And then probably the next significant transition after 16 years of marriage was my choice to leave that marriage. And that was tough. It was tough on me, tough on the kids, tough on everybody. But which, I'm happy. Let's say I'm not happy. I'm comforted to say that we're all friends. My ex-wife and myself and my children, we were all together here over the Christmas holidays, and my children are grown now, and so we have been able to repair a lot of the damage done from that situation. And then the other most significant transitionary period is one that we've already covered, was what happened when the government weaponized me against them by taking my livelihood away from me when they decided to lock the world down and called me a non-essential worker.
Yeah, it did, didn't they?
Yes, it did.
Do you consider that to be the same event, lockdowns and January 6th, as one, or are those two separate transitions for you?
They are two sides of the same coin, because they were part and parcel of that transition. Obviously, the January 6th thing happened during that time. More than likely, had I not been out of work, I probably would not have gone to January 6th. And let me tell you why. I don't attend political rallies. I hate them, despise them with a passion. I don't go to protest events. I'm not a riot chasing journalist. That's not what I do. I have no interest in doing that kind of thing. It is only on the rare, the first protest event I ever attended in my life was when the Reopen NC protests began in downtown Raleigh, the capital of North Carolina. And I lived only a mile and a half walk from the Capitol building. So I would just walk down there for the protest events with my gun, open carrying, by the way, and and with my camera. And that's what I did.
So that was a target of opportunity for you, if we're going to use some kind of parlance for that. Would January 6th kind of be the same thing because you were out of work?
Yeah, well, what had happened in that lockdown year was, by the time we got to the fall of 2020, I decided to redeem my time, that I would start touring the country. And I would go around. I went to 28 states during the lockdowns doing meetups with my blog followers. So we were organizing. I would find somebody that would volunteer in a particular area, People were, I put it out obviously through my blog and through my social media, and I would get people to volunteer, and they would set up, and so I would coordinate a routing for that. And so I spent months traveling around the country doing that. I would have done it a lot longer, and gone. I was planning on even going west. I think the furthest west I got was Texas, Oklahoma. That was as far west as I got, and had intention and had volunteer. Colorado, Oregon, Washington, California, to bring me, Arizona, to bring me out there and set up meetups for me as well. But January 6th kind of really changed all of that for me. Sure. But and to be honest too, it was about a year and a half we finally started getting back to work, and I was able to start booking my band and start making some money again. And not just for myself, but for my band members. This is a lot of people. A lot of us were making money in the music industry, so the obligation to get them back to work was on my shoulders. And so, what ended up happening was during those looping tours that I would do as I visited these 28 states, I had just gotten home. I had a meetup in Charlotte, North Carolina, the New Year's Eve. So, the night before New Year's Eve. And then I came home for New Year's and basically did laundry and repacked the car and decided that I was going to start another loop up the north, going towards the Northeast, and that I would use January 6th in DC as my jump off point for that. Since, it was, as the president said, on December 19th of 2020, it's going to be wild. I said, all right, well, I'll go watch that. I'll go record that. I'll go do interviews. So I showed up with my man on the street microphone and my, my extra battery packs and my tripod, and I intended to record and get impressions from people, because surely at this point, this was the last chance that if the quote unquote Kraken was going to be unleashed, it was going to be that day. Sure. And of course it wasn't. Of course. There was no Kraken.
Well, there was a Kraken of some kind.
Yeah, well, it wasn't what we expected.
No. Let me kind of hone this in, because my curiosity is piqued. You were making a living as a journalist during the COVID lockdowns. You demonstrated that by visiting your blog audience, the people that were paying for you to live under journalistic, a journalistic pursuit.
Yeah.
Was that introduced? Was that possibly, was that allowed to be introduced in your court case with Judge Cooper?
Well, nothing was ever introduced because we didn't go to trial.
Was that part of the motions going back and forth? I mean, you have to throw motions to dismiss, I have to imagine, or you have to try to act like it. To get DOJ to change their mind.
It's an interesting situation, because even when I did the voluntary and negotiated interview with two FBI special agents, one of the questions they asked me was how much money I was making as a journalist. And I looked at my attorney. I said, "Do I have to answer that question?" He said, "No." I said, "None of your business."
Right.
So that's how I handled that question. But
because it's not necessary to establish a dollar amount, but you were making money.
Obviously, I mean, I was able to afford to be out on the road, living on the road, staying in hotels, travel expenses, and not be home working, because there was no work anyway to begin with.
Sure.
So yeah, no, I had once I had monetized that, it started ramping up pretty quickly.
Have you dealt with any kind of hate, people who disagree with you politically, in person? I understand that it's online all the time, but have you dealt with it in person?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
How do they square the idea of liberty, which we always hear people on the political left, they want to call themselves liberals. In theory, that means something about freedom. How does a liberal square the idea that someone making a living with a journalistic pursuit is an acceptable target for the DOJ and that you're a problem? How do they do that when they come at you? Do they ever answer it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they have a real hard time. I've done press conferences on my own case. Particularly, we didn't follow this all the way through earlier when I said that the day after the election was my pre-trial hearing, and that was a Zoom hearing with my attorneys and the judge and the court people and the prosecutor, that sort of thing. And that was basically when the judge deny all those motions that you raised a moment ago, and basically laid the groundwork for us that we were not going to be able to present the case that we intended, which was a selective prosecution case, and that we had required, or we had filed a motion demanding that the government turn over the evidence of their investigations into those other 80 journalists not being prosecuted. There must be, Your Honor, and Mr. and Mrs. DOJ prosecuting me, there must be a reason why you've chosen not to go off after those other 80 individuals for trespassing, glorified trespassing, but you've gone after Mr. Baker for glorified trespassing. Because that's the only crime he broke. Well, that's the only law he broke. All right.
The argument you wanted to make, but were not permitted to make,
That's
was other journalists were there. Other journalists did the same thing. They were not prosecuted. We'd like to see a discussion of why that is. And the DOJ doesn't have to answer that.
Yeah, that's right. And so here's the bottom line: is J.D. Rivera was only prosecuted not for his behavior as a journalist or inside the Capitol. He was prosecuted because he was an activist with Latinos for Trump.
Prior to his time.
Prior to the crime. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to see not only all of the behaviors that had been investigated of those journalists, but we wanted to know what they were prior and following their crime, because they committed the same crime. As I said, the press pass is not a license.
The way that you prosecute crimes, I'm going to share this with the audience, lest they don't know this, because I think this is actually worth a point of clarification. There's a thing called pattern jury instructions, and those are the lists of things that the jury is read when they decide on a specific charge. You're in violation of 18 USC, let's say 1512, Part C. Yeah. That was one of the things they were doing. That was the obstruction of justice piece, or the obstruction of official proceeding. So people said that. So you get charged with that. It's a felony. And in order to meet the felony burden, the jury is read pattern jury instructions. They vary from district to district, but they basically hold the same things. And that means that's what the prosecution must prove. They must give, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the following things have happened. And so you can go down the check mark and say, yes, 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 guilty.
Yes.
Right? None of those things ever have anything to do with the exception of there's a little bit of intent on some. But it's never the end all be all that you're an activist for, and this is how you made a living. It's all about the elements of the actual crime have to be proved. The following things happened. We've proven that this person has done those things at this time, and that's the accusation.
Right.
Who he is as a person, or what color hair he has, or what color skin he has, or whether he brushes his teeth or not, or whether he likes to high five security guards when he goes to the mall. None of those things are relevant. They don't matter.
Right.
They might color around the edges, which is what you do in a trial, but they wouldn't let you discuss. And they went after people simply because of, it sounds like this is the weaponized piece of it that we talk about, your actual political beliefs, which were deemed unacceptable.
I've only used 3 examples so far: Luke Mogelson, myself, and J.D. Rivera. Let's throw a 4th example in here.
Okay.
Stephen Horn.
Yep.
He's a young journalist. He was only 21, 22 years old at the time, but he had a history. He had built a dossier of press passage and badges that he had accumulated since he was 16 years old. This is a kid with a career-minded desire to be a journalist from the time he was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
He shows up, he fashions inside of his bicycle helmet a hidden camera. Why? Because he had been covering the riots in Raleigh in the summer of 2020, and he saw and observed as a young, greenhorn, as they would, say a cub reporter. He had observed that if you were identified on the streets as press, you might get the shit kicked out of you by somebody on either side.
Sure.
If you're on the right and somebody sees somebody from CNN, they get aggressive with them. If you're coming from Antifa BLM and you see somebody with Blaze Media or Fox News, you might get crap beat out of you.
Sure.
So he had observed that. So he fashioned a hidden camera, wore no political attire, just like myself that day, just like JD. And he went in to blend in. Now, Luke Mogelson of the New Yorker, he hid his press credentials so that he would not be identified as press for the same exact stated reason. JD, same thing. Stephen Horn applied to the Metro PD for a temporary press pass that day, and they refused to issue one. So he went in without a current or valid or recognized credential by anybody in particular, although that, as we know, that's not legally required to be the press.
Right.
And as we also have already stated, a press badge is not a license to enter a restricted space. But Mr. Horn, young Mr. Horn, entered that restricted space nonetheless. He made one key error, if it was an error at all, in order to blend in. At one point, one time during the entire time that he was in the Capitol, he said this: USA, USA, USA. Boom. Therefore, he was taking part in the mob. All right. So that was how the DOJ characterized him. As a result of that mistake, they did not allow him to present a selective prosecution case, just as they denied me the right to do so. Stephen went to trial. He went to a jury trial, was not allowed to ever show the jury his history of having press credentials. That was denied him by the court. A Trump appointee judge, by the way, in his case.
No.
I covered his trial. I was sitting in the courtroom for every minute of his trial. Just mind-boggling.
Yeah, I want to give the audience a moment to just digest what you said, because every time I hear something like this, it's the opposite of what I think justice looks like. But I think many people on the right are now starting to see this. You get told whether or not you can present the defense that you want to present, and a judge makes the decision. That's foreign concept to me. But what it does remind me of is, you said earlier that you had 4 transition points in your life. I asked you to reflect on them. You gave me 4. The first was going over and working behind the Iron Curtain, joining a band and doing so, married, divorced, lockdowns, and J6. Those are the 4 that you named. Is that still?
That's 4 biggest. That's by
sure.
by,
Yeah. I'm not, obviously you got more life experience in between those points, but let's, in the 4 of those, is there a parallel between what you were seeing in the courtroom and the way you observed it post January 6th? Because you covered a lot of these trials, I know, and the impressions you got being a teenager and a young 20-something behind the Iron Curtain, and what we heard was the evil empire.
Mm-hmm. I can give you an exact comparison. The organization I was working with was working very closely with dissident groups behind the Iron Curtain. And one of these particular dissidents that was assisting us in setting up concerts in behind the Iron Curtain, his real name, I can say today, his name was Herbert Murd. Herbert Murd. He was Estonian, and he was helping us set up concerts not only in Estonia, but also in Russia and other Soviet republics at that time. He was a concert promoter, but he was also an underground dissident. Because of his work with us, he wasn't technically breaking laws. There's no law on the books that says you can't set up concerts for an American band. All right. So what they do is when you break a law over in the old Soviet Union days, or let me rephrase that. When you do something they don't like, but it's not a broken law, then they force you to break a law that is on the books. Well, they have what they call their they call it the parasite law. And that is, if you don't have a job for 6 months, then you go to prison for a year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because everybody in the Soviet Union has a job. That was, as you know, that was one of the great glories of communism, is that
Full
they
employment.
have 100% employment.
Yeah.
Right. And so everybody has a job. Well, then suddenly, when they don't want you to have a job, they just put the word out and nobody can hire you. So you become persona non grata in the labor market. You cannot get hired. 6 months later, you're officially a parasite of the people, and then they throw you in prison for a year. So that's what happened to Herbert twice. He did 2 prison terms for what his work with us. What's the comparison there? It's very simple. In my case, Stephen Horn's case, J.D. Rivera's case, we were not allowed to demonstrate to the people, the jury, the case we wanted to show them. And so the government says, no, we'll handle that. We'll make the decision on what you can tell that jury or what you can present to the government in your defense and what you can't and are not allowed to present. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing because Herbert Murd, we used to call him Victor. Our code name for him was Victor.
Sure.
And he had to go stand in front of a Soviet jury both times. He wasn't allowed to present to the jury, yeah, I was just booking shows. The police didn't like it. The government didn't like it. So they prevented me from getting a damn job. It's the exact same thing. It's Sovietism in the DC District Court.
Did you know all that before January 6th and your kind of entry into your legal battles?
I had no idea how bad, how dark, how deep it went.
What did that do for your perspective about what is and is not possible in America?
So let's go back to that weaponization phrase, right? Bring it back full circle.
Yep.
Remember I said that it's more important, that word is more important to me now than it's ever been, because when we got off of that Zoom call, which was my pretrial hearing, myself and all of my attorneys jumped on another Zoom call, private, just between us, to which one of my attorneys, who was a former federal prosecutor, he said, Steve, this is nothing but a shaming exercise they're about to put you through. And all of the attorneys agreed. And I said, that's exactly right. And that's why I'm instructing you right now to inform the court and inform the government that I'm not going to allow them to put me through that shaming exercise. I'm going to plead guilty to all 4 charges. And I'm going to roll the dice that Trump is going to keep his promise and issue those pardons before I can be sentenced. So that's what we did. So exactly 1 week later, on November 12th, a week after the election, I had to go to D.C. I had to stand before Judge Cooper. And in that moment, not only did I also almost get thrown in jail for contempt, but that's another story. But at the end of it, once I finally recited the words using the exact phraseology that the court demanded of me, confessing like I was signing a pre-confession written by Stalin, same fucking thing, Kyle. Give me a moment.
Yeah.
The judge then said to the clerk, says, when will Mr. Baker's sentencing hearing be? And she starts typing. She said, that'll be on March the 6th at 10 a.m. And Christopher Cooper then goes, okay. So, Mr. Baker, since I'm likely not to see you in March, he acknowledged right there, federal judge, that pardons were probably coming. Since I'm not going to see you in March, I'm going to go ahead, and he used this word, very interesting. He said, I'm going to go ahead and hazard to deliver to you the remarks that I would normally present during a sentencing hearing. So he began to dress me down for the next 5-8 minutes, whatever it was. He did not chastise me for my behavior on January 6th. Guess what he chastised me for? He goes, I'm aware that in your journalism, in your stories, in your reporting, that you've used the phrase weaponization of the Department of Justice and the bias of this court. Kyle, a federal judge, hazarded to chastise me for my First Amendment journalistic privilege of calling it as I saw it.
Yeah, that the word we're looking for is irony. Isn't it ironic? Not in a what was that lady's name?
Right. Yes.
Why can I not think of her name right now?
You're talking about the Canadian singer that, isn't this ironic?
Isn't it ironic? Isn't it actually ironic that a judge decided to tell you that the justice system was not weaponized by giving his opinion and scolding you?
Which means that someone, a clerk, or himself, or his wedding officiant, Merrick Garland, had informed him that in my journalism, something that judge is not supposed to be doing. He'd been tracking me.
I think we could have a new, I'm going to drop my bail for a moment here and just kind of think out loud with you. But I think we could create a really good, maybe we can get, what's that guy's name? Scott, is it Scott? Starts with an L. He's a painter in New York. He's a Trump.
Oh yeah.
Labayo. Yeah. I know I've had people cover him for me.
Right.
Maybe he could paint Lady Justice, no blindfold, just scolding with like a wooden spoon some January 6ers now, because it does feel absurd, and it does feel show trial-y, and it feels Soviet. And I guess I hadn't even put those connections together until I sat and listened to you talk about it. And it's just important to me to make these connections when I can.
So, so I haven't been sentenced. My sentencing hearing is still in the future.
But you got the speech already.
Yeah, but I got the speech. But the one thing he did not hazard to do was allow me to make my comments that I would normally be allowed to make in a sentencing hearing. So I had to zip it and take it while he dressed me down for my journalism. And so I honestly think it was an unforced error. I have the transcript now of that hearing, and we're going to be releasing that, and we're going to be writing, obviously, a very fun story on that. I was interviewing a week and a half ago in anticipation of January 6th, one of the interview specials that I have coming up, and it's Ken and Angel Harrelson. Ken was one of the first 5 convicted Oath Keepers in Oath Keeper 1 trial. And he's also got the lightest sentence and is already out. And when I was interviewing them, something else crossed my mind that I also had not thought of in all of the months since his sentencing hearing, which took place in, he was sentenced in May of 23. And in his sentencing hearing, Judge Amit Mehta said to him, and I was very excited to report this. I thought this was fantastic because it certainly reflected the judge's sentencing compared to the others. Because he only gave him 4 years, because he said to him, Mr. Harrelson, I don't think you're the man that the government has made you out to be. So from May 23rd of 23 until a week and a half ago, when I had Ken and Angel up on the screen there in Blaze Studio as I'm interviewing them, I had never thought this, and it suddenly just went in my head. Judge Mehta just told the world that he believed that the government was lying about you, Ken. When he said, I don't believe you're the man that the government made you out to be, then what he said was, I think that the government was lying about you. And by the way, Kyle, between you and me and 350 million other Americans. Yeah, he was fucking lying. They were lying about Ken Harrelson over and over and over again in that trial.
Bill Shipley says something about the government's duty. You know what it is?
What's that?
Their duty is to have fair process. The outcome is not. It's not important to the justice system.
That's correct. But there's only one moral function of government. That's to protect its citizens from force and fraud. Period. End. It stops, can be contained right there in that statement.
Say it one more time.
To protect its citizens from force and fraud.
My very good friend, the person that launched this podcast with me, and a former FBI agent, a suspendable, uses those exact terms and says that's the only function of the FBI and the DOJ.
It should be, but that was not the function of the FBI or DOJ during these January 6th Stalinistic prosecutions, because they created scenarios that did not exist. That's how I got on the whole Oath Keepers case in the first place. Was I read Ken Harrelson's charging documents. I found documented between 6 to 7 blatant lies that the FBI affiant signed to that were in his original charging document, statement of facts, quote unquote, that were used to I think hanging with his first eight charges, most of which were felonies. I think they were all felonies, as a matter of fact. And this was before the superseding indictment, where he was folded into the seditious conspiracy indictment with their founder, Stuart Rhodes. And I called his attorney up after reading and finding these blatant mischaracterizations. Well, I just softened it a little bit there from lies, but that's what they were. And I called his attorney up, and I'm like, Brad, you're not going to believe this. You know what I just saw? Whoa. He's like, calm down. He goes, yeah, we know. But that's what we're up against, and that's where we're headed in this thing. And then, of course, this is exactly how the trial started out. So you have in Oath Keeper 1 trial, you have 5 defendants sitting across the room, and the lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Nessler, he points across the room at those guys for the jury to see, and he said, they were the leaders of the insurrection. They were the tip of the spear. These 5 individuals. Kyle, they weren't even on the property when the property was breached. They were sitting in the VIP section with the Secret Service at the Ellipse with their protectees that they were going to be escorting over from the Ellipse to their permitted stages and sound systems, where they were going to be speaking with Congress members an hour later.
Yeah. Does the word Giglio, does the court case Giglio mean anything to you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, of course it does.
You want to tell people what Giglio is, and we'll talk about it for a second?
Well, it's slightly different than Brady, but only very slightly. You have a better way of going into the technical details of these things, but you go ahead.
Giglio is a requirement to notify a defense that there has been documented falsehoods told under oath,
right,
by a law enforcement officer or somebody involved in the prosecution. You have to share it. It's a mandated requirement. And so if you've lied under oath and it's provable, then that's supposed to haunt you for the rest of your law enforcement career. And what it means is that, generally speaking, with very few exceptions, you're no longer able to do work that requires you to testify. Because once a liar, it's very simple, as you can imagine, Steve. You're an agent. You've gotten up and said things that are not true in a statement of sworn facts that you have sworn and attested to be true with your hand to God.
Yep.
Then the question that every defense attorney simply has to ask is, you've been proven to have lied before, either on the stand or under oath. Which part of the testimony do you have here that you lied about?
Right.
And they say, well, I didn't. And they're like, how would anyone believe you? You've already done it before. You're done. Generally, that's the way it's looked at. It's supposed to be a death sentence for law enforcement testimonial capabilities.
And this is a part of Brady, the requirement to turn over all evidence, pertinent, germane evidence to the case from the prosecutors to the defense team as well. And then that small portion, Giglio, dealing directly with law enforcement, is something that you obviously know that I've been very intimately involved with in my investigations of Capitol police officers that testified in that trial. But in my opinion, that FBI affiant who signed that statement of facts, same thing. Mm-hmm. He lied. He lied about the behavior of Ken Harrelson to the point to where the government, the DOJ, or the prosecutors, which we refer in a trial to as the government, now brings those false accusations against Ken Harrelson and the other 4 defendants in that case in front of the jury, the people, lies to them about their behavior. And then blatantly lies and creates a scenario that says they were the leaders. They were the exact opposite. But this is why I know that they were framed. That's why I know that there was a quote unquote star chamber that was put together to tighten up all the loose ends as they put this together, which is why that they weren't allowed. That's why those officers who did in fact present perjury in that trial were allowed to testify, is because under Giglio, guess what didn't happen? The prosecutors did not inform defense or the court that both of those guys had been disciplined by their law enforcement agency for telling lies.
So we got some, let's just call it bad faith operations, intentional or otherwise. Turns out the tie is supposed to go to the citizen. In fact, the error is supposed to go to the citizen under our constitutional republic. It's set up to protect we the people and not anybody on the other. The government doesn't have any rights that I've known. I've looked and I don't see any in the Bill of Rights, the rights of government. What I see are protections of the people and the states, and those are not the federal government. So that's kind of interesting. What I want to do is take a quick breather, I think. I want to kind of get our minds right, because all of that set us up for the way that you've pursued what you've tried to uncover. Good, bad, or indifferent, a truth about what's been going on, how you got there, and this mindset that the government has been pretty comfortable lying, or at least omitting the truth at the very least, and not sharing the factual information with the American people, but more importantly with the jury and with the defense, who's supposed to have the constitutional right to be able to defend themselves fairly. I think that has taken you down an interesting, maybe a dark road, and I want to get into it. There's things you haven't been able to talk about until right now. So coming up next, that's where we're going to go. We're going to get into something that sounds maybe very far-fetched if you didn't have all this background. We'll be right back. Yeah, we'll come right back with Steve Baker.
All right, my friends, I hope you're filling up your coffee. I hope you are getting ready for part 2. It just keeps going. Before we get there, let's just say thanks again to the folks over at Patriot Protect for bringing us this long form. Again, a powerful security service that will help you remove yourself from scammers and all of the internet criminals that are out there trying to find out where you live, trying to find out who you are, find out your personal data. And if they can find that, they can target you. These guys use a search and destroy protocol to scan and scrub all of your personal data off over 200 people searches and data broker websites. They are effective at getting such done, and it stays in place 24/7 for up to a year. Get that annual subscription. Use my name, KYLE. Save yourself 15% off it. It takes it down to about $5 a month. That's not very much money. It'll save you that in just time picking up the phone from scumbags who are trying to get your stuff. It's a fast setup. It makes you relatively invisible to most of the criminals out there. You're going to block scammers. You're going to protect yourself against debt collectors and other weirdos who might want to show up at your house to bother you, show up at your business, at your family's businesses, at your family's locations, and it's going to keep you from phishing and identity theft. Totally worth your time. Check out promo code Kyle over at kyle.patriot-protect.com. Check them out right now. Let's get back into it with Steve Baker.
All right, folks, and we're back with Steve Baker, musician turned exposer of truth. In fact, you can find the webpage. What's the webpage, Steve, where people can find your journalistic activities?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's 2 or 3 ways. Obviously, go to X. I mean, X is like breathing now. It seems to be where we do everything first, or at least immediately thereafter. And that's TPC for USA. Everybody goes, what's TPC? Well, that used to be my blog name, The Pragmatic Constitutionalist. So I'm probably, I think with the advent of the new year here, I'm finally going to lose the TPC for USA moniker and just go to my name in some form. But that's still the best way to find me on all social media, whether it's on Facebook, TPC, the number 4 USA. And then my locals page is also TPC for USA. So it's easy to find.
You're a challenging guy, yeah.
Once you get past the TPC for USA. So those are the easy ways. And then, of course, on the Blaze, I am not TPC for USA. I'm Steve Baker. I'm not Stephen Michael Baker. I'm not, S. Michael Baker or some other, fancy form of my name that writers like to do. But I am just Steve Baker. And they do actually have, for our January 6th reporting, if you want to just key in on that, they actually have given me my own URL. It's theblaze.com/truth. That's very trusting of them, by the way.
It is. Yeah, there's a lot of trust in that. I like it. And that's where we're going to get into today. So your understanding of what happened on January 6th has been shaded, I think, by a lot of trials. And your investigation into it comes from a personal interest, I think, right?
Yeah.
You've got a lot at stake in this, including the outcome of the last election, which is going to change the game for you. Yeah. Let's talk about something that you haven't been talking about until now, but you've been working on. I would like you to introduce the topic however you like. And folks, for full disclosure, Steve has pinged information that I've kept in my heart quietly and, tried not to betray any confidences. And he's going to be able to talk about some of that now in a way that he hasn't much other than over at Blaze very recently.
Yeah. Well, let's say this in full disclosure as well. We're taping this particular episode at a time in advance of us releasing this information through the Blaze. So we're going to time that. So by the time you see this, more than likely the story will be out, at least part one of our multi-part series that we're doing on this story. Now let's go back to the beginning in terms of the research of January 6th. It's true that the government has weaponized me against them, beginning with COVID, but also as a result of what I've experienced related to January 6th. But I was already reporting on January 6th long before I was ever investigated or knew I was being investigated. Long before the FBI ever reached out to me, I was already reporting on some pretty serious aspects of January 6th that nobody else was touching, especially not in the mainstream press. And then, of course, I did get a little bit more motivated after I realized that I was being investigated, and after I got the first insinuation that they were going to arrest me back in November of 21. And then they went silent for 20 months. And it was during that period that we began to release really hard-hitting stories related to particularly the trial perjuries by Capitol Police. I had a certain element of my attorneys, a faction of my legal team believed that it was as a result of me releasing those stories that I had basically built a moat around myself. And then there was the other faction of my attorneys who went, no, you're more of a target now than you ever were before. So the fact that we didn't hear from the government for 20 months after their initial threat, I kind of thought the first faction was winning the argument, that I had built the moat around myself by virtue of them having to realize, well, of course, so I've got one group of attorneys saying that, one of them led by a former federal prosecutor, the other group of attorneys, one of them led by a former federal prosecutor, Bill Shipley. He was the guy that said, no, you've been poking the bear. They're coming.
And Bill's a little bit more cynical in the world, it seems.
Yeah, he said, look, I've been there and I know what they're doing. He said, the only thing that they're doing related to you is they're going to the conference table and they are doing damage assessment, PR, damage assessment. What kind of black eye are we going to take by prosecuting a reporter at the Blaze? And he said, it's apparent when it was apparent that leading up to my eventual arrest on March 1st of last year, it was apparent that they had decided that they were going to weather the storm and take it, and that it was more important for them to take me out. So that's what they did. And when I say that I was looking at things before I even knew I was being investigated, I was the very first journalist, to my knowledge. I mean, there's always the possibility another blogger or a social media influencer or a podcaster had broached this topic at the time. But 6 weeks after January 6th, for the first time, I published words similar to this, paraphrasing, is that there were elements of U.S. military embedded in the crowd on January 6th. I didn't know why they were there. In fact, I speculated and postulated an idea that it was not nefarious based on, as we said before, the one moral function of government is to protect us from force and fraud. So when I say, for instance, and I say it freely, if I say, hell, there were probably 200 FBI plainclothes agents at January 6th, that's not nefarious. I mean, you got the Washington field office there. You've got the Hoover building down the road. You're talking about a bunch of guys throwing on their jackets and walking down to see what the hell's going on, or maybe told to go see what the hell's going on because, we do surveillance and it's our job to keep people safe, make sure there's no untoward activities taking place. That's what we expect from you guys. That's what I would want if they were doing their job honorably and constitutionally and protecting us from force and fraud.
Yeah. I don't normally want to interject, but this one I think actually is worth bearing. This was my profession.
Yeah.
And so I say this, if you're new to the audience and you don't know the background, I spent several years in the Washington field office out of Washington, D.C., and I did so in a group that's called SOG, the Special Operations Group, which is a misnomer. It should be called the Special Observations Group because what we did was surveillance for a living. I was a professional surveillance agent, thousands of hours a year doing this. And one of the things that was very important that we would do is we'd walk around in crowds on big events. And we would report and we would observe. And our goal was to protect First Amendment liberties. That was the whole point, right? I mean, I think I've told you this. There's nothing nefarious. You're exactly correct. Your assessment is not wrong. Here's the weird thing, though. I wasn't told that we had to stand up for January 6th. And that's always been a little bit unusual because for whatever reason, and I don't think it was an FBI thing. I think you and I probably are in agreement on that.
Correct.
For all of the elements of the federal government that exist, the FBI felt very flat-footed on that day. Yes. And I can only say it as someone who worked there who does not love the FBI. It turns out I actually have probably an equal dislike for them. I consider you a friend. I'm concerned about the things they've done to you and others. It's amazing to me that we were not told to stand up and do what's called an NSSE. And if you guys want to watch, Google my name and that, and you can find Kyle Seraphin talking about national special security events. And that's not what we're talking about today. But it was not a national special security event. January 6th was a different animal in so many ways, and it really has been pivotal because we kind of have this belief that things were not normal. There probably were people in the crowd that were not admitted in the last OIG report.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're trying to pick through the pieces, and you've been doing that for quite a long time. And so I think your assessments have been very fair, although sometimes pretty wild. And I think what we're going to talk about is a little wild.
Yeah.
It's hard to grasp. And so, but this is something you even told me in our first interview, that you believe that there were DOD assets there.
Right. And this is, again, not necessarily a nefarious thing. And when I first wrote about it and published that story on February 23rd or 24th of 2021, 6 weeks after January 6th, I actually said that. I said, more than likely, because who these elements of our U.S., special operations forces were, that I fully anticipated that these were good guys and that they were there to take care of business if anything really did get out of hand. Like, for instance, I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that there were absolute expectations that there would be a lot more gunplay that day, that the MAGA bubbas would show up and be provoked into using the firearms that they carried under their heavy winter clothes, and that they might take out a couple of law enforcement officers. I actually wrote in that very article that that was the intent of the provocateurs, was to elicit that behavior. And I even went so far as to say in that same article, thank God it did not happen, because we would have lost the Second Amendment that day. The right lost its it got its biggest narrative defeat it's ever suffered in the history of this country that day. And the left won that day. What they didn't win was their ultimate prize is a right to call an emergency session and eliminate the Second Amendment. And so, thank God that did not happen. The only person that fired a shot against another individual that day was Officer Michael Byrd, who killed Ashley Babbitt. So I just assumed that this particular special operations group was there to be literally undercover, blend in, which is that's their expertise in their operations around the world. And that if anything did get out of hand with gunplay, that they'd take care of it in a matter of seconds.
How did you know that then?
Sources. I live very close to Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty.
It's Fort Bragg forever to me too.
Yeah, it's always Fort Bragg for us. But I had a source in Delta Force who told me that these guys were there.
And who are these guys we're talking about?
These guys are a special operations group. They operate out of two different bases, either side, north and south of D.C., one at Fort Belvoir and then one at Fort Meade in Maryland. They don't have a name. They are generally referred to, let me start over. The SOF community, special operators community, refer to them as Orange. They refer to themselves as Orange, variously referred to as Task Force Orange. The only time they get a name is when they move, when they're doing an operation overseas. Then that operation gets a name, but they don't have a name. And so that's part of the plausible deniability of DOD, because they're a black budget operation. They have long been known to exist. I can walk up. I just did it last week to a Navy SEAL. I was introduced to a Navy SEAL last week. I walked up to him. I said, so if I say the word Orange, you know what I'm talking about? He goes, yeah, of course. You ever work with them? Yeah, of course. They know who they are.
Right.
If I asked the Pentagon, if I called the Pentagon's public affairs office right now and said, I'd like to talk to you about Task Force Orange at Fort Belvoir, they go, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
And yet they have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Which is listed under ISA.
Yeah. But they've had many different names over the years. There's a book that came out last year, 2024, that's just simply called The Unit.
I have that book.
All right. And it's not a very good or very well written tome, but it is the bio of one of their former operators, an Egyptian who migrated here to the United States, joined the Army, worked his way through, got into special forces. His language skills gave him a lot of advantages. He actually was originally, before he joined the Army, was working as an interpreter for the FBI. And after 9/11, actually, I think even leading up to and before 9/11. And so he's a leftist, which is kind of interesting. The guy that wrote the book, The Unit. He's actually very well known among the operators. And some of my sources in TFO know him very well, consider him friend, and have been in the shit with him overseas.
Now, just as a kind of an aside, but as a way to help explain a little bit about this unit. The special operations community in general tends to leave pretty hard to the right. It's pretty red-blooded American patriot types. Maybe, would you say 90-10 kind of thing? 90% or even higher, kind of like guns and God and serving country and that sort of thing?
Yeah, about 3 months ago, I was having dinner with a, we'll going forward, we'll just refer to them as TFO, Task Force Orange.
Okay.
For the listener. So I was having dinner with a retired TFO operator. He's a specialist in a particular type of weapon, which you and I are going to be leading into here in a moment. And when we got together, he handed me, Faraday cage for my phone bag. I already had one with me, which he was very impressed by that I had one already. Mm-hmm. And then he said to me, now I had already met him in two different scenarios where we were around a lot of other guys. And these were all, by the way, in these scenarios, they were all special forces guys, SEALs, Delta Force, CIA. Anyway, they were either IC community or SOF guys. Mm-hmm. And so he had been introduced to me in these social settings specifically to get to know me and to become comfortable with me. So when he finally decided to meet with me privately, the first thing that he said to me as he looked at me across the table, he said, I'm going to use his language, but so, bleep if you care to. But he said, the only reason that I'm meeting with you right now is because you already know too fucking much. But I'm also here to tell you that you have no fucking idea yet what these weapons are capable of. Now, that was the opening line.
It's pretty ominous, Steve.
We've since become actually very close. We talk all the time. He trusts me. I have not burned him. He has been a source on several things, and has been very accurate on all of those, all of the things that he has shared with Blaze Media. And of course, I was introduced to him through other of those TFO operatives as well. Now, so there's the groundwork laid. So during this conversation, this is answering your question about what's the percentage of guys that kind of lean right, conservative, MAGA type special operators, to which I asked him at this particular dinner. I said, specifically, I'm going to throw some numbers out at you. You tell me whether these numbers are accurate or not. I said, if I am referring to Delta Force, Navy SEALs teams, we're looking at 85 to 90% conservative, Republican, maybe even MAGA Trump supporters. I said, is it about right? He said, yeah, that's fair. I said, but TFO, it's only about 60%. And he goes, 55, maybe. Meaning that this particular group, this particular unit, these are, look, you see a SEAL walk in the room and you know he's a SEAL, right?
How do you know he's a SEAL, Steve?
Body type,
because he told your girlfriend or your wife that he's a SEAL right away.
That's right. Well, he hadn't got there yet, but he's going to get there, right?
Yes, that's right.
No, but I mean, biceps, they've all got them. You can see their guns. Let's just say that.
There's a frogman build. 100%.
Right. And so you don't necessarily know when a Delta Force guy walks in the room. Very different characteristics. And you will never know when Orange walks in the room. These guys are all polyglots. They speak multiple languages. The guys that I've met speak, 5 languages and 3 fluently, or they speak 8 and 5 of them what they call native. They're very smart, multidisciplined guys. Their skill sets are not based on strength, and they don't have the frogman body, but their skill set is mental discipline and mental endurance. Primarily isolation type endurance skill sets, being able to survive psychologically embedded in a foreign land without your first language, without any contact for months at a time or weeks at a time with anybody else, and having to gather intelligence and survive and make sure you leave no traces of your existence during that time. That's why there's another book written called The Killer Elite about this particular organization. And there's only 102 of them. And so it's such a small class of individuals that it's very easy for the commander to know them intimately, personally, and also because of the psychological conditioning and endurance tests that they have to go through. It's the most difficult to pass in all of the U.S. military. And as a result of that, their commanders know who they are. They know what their politics are. But you tend to get a higher left-leaning percentage because of their right brain intellectual capacities. Let's just call it for what it is.
I would also imagine that having a lot of exposure to other cultures, to have to take them in fluently, you end up with a little bit less Eurocentric, American-centric politics. You end up with a little bit more of a, what would they used to call it? Like a continental perspective or something to that effect, or something a little bit more cosmopolitan, if you will.
Right. And so in this same meeting that I was describing earlier, let's be perfectly clear. These guys who are retired from TFO absolutely do not want to believe that current active duty TFO members went and embedded themselves in the crowd on January 6th.
Why don't they want to believe that?
They said under no circumstance. I mean, just start with the whole, posse comitatus thing. But they believe that under any circumstance that would be a violation of not only their oath, but their actual existence, what they do.
Is that universal amongst the people you've spoken to?
Correct. Absolutely don't believe that active TFO operators were there. And because I believe it's a violation of their actual orders and operational existence. And so this same individual, retired TFO, after he admits to me that, about 35% liberal, 45% liberal, rather 45%, or leftist in TFO. I said, so the commanders, their troop leaders, they know the politics of the people in their command, right? He said, sure. I said, what if a more leftist member of TFO truly believes that the guy at the top of the ticket is literally Hitler, as he's been portrayed to be, that he is a Nazi, as he has been portrayed to be, that he is a totalitarian, and that his intent for his existence is to take down democracy, quote unquote, then how difficult would it be to convince a particular hard left-leaning TFO operative that he was doing the work of God and country if he followed such an order? And this retired TFO guy looked at me dead in the eyes, and he did this. He went, fuck. He hadn't thought that one through. So a year, 10 and a half months later, after I published that article in February of 21, Newsweek came out with a story, really clickbaity headline, which basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty accurate, secret commandos with shoot to kill orders at January 6th.
Right.
Wow. Okay. I was like, finally, 10 and a half months later, William Arkin of Newsweek validates my own knowledge.
Let's meander off the path for 1 second. Right. Let's talk about Bill Arkin. You want to?
Oh, do I? Yeah, no. I mean, Arkin is a known. Everybody likes using the phrase "mockingbird media guy," but he's been very close to the intelligence community and the DoD community for decades as a spokesman for them, and all of the information he leaked in that story, which is ultimately very valuable, was basically a CYA leak from an FBI source about what they did have available to them that day on January 6th. We learned conclusively, which I had also reported, that there were elements of the tactical units from other three-letter agencies, including, I guess we don't ever refer to the U.S. Marshals as a three-letter organization, but every federal agency that has a tactical team, from FBI's HRT all the way to the IRS tactical teams, were held in they were positioned around the Capitol for emergency deployment that day. And that just raises a lot of questions, A, why were they there? If you didn't think something was going on, if you didn't have intel that something was going to pop, why would you push them out?
They didn't call it an NSSE. If it had been an NSSE, that would have been a standard protocol. You would have had all those people on standby in various locations. We call it sitting on the bag, but you would have had people with rifles, helmets, and ready to go, and they'd be sitting on their bag waiting for either a stand up or a standby to get to work. The interesting thing about Bill Arkin, or William Arkin, that I just want to add for people's context recently, if you read a story in Newsweek, which was covered extensively on our podcast here, talking about how the DOJ has declared some Trump supporters as 266 Oscars, anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremists, and you read that the way that we read it here at the Kyle Seraphin Show, as a warning, right? Not as a disclosure, but as a fact, as a kind of a heads up, like you're being targeted and you should know it. Same William Arkin. So William Arkin has been interesting in sharing warnings, messages that are proved, and so this is not something to be taken and say, well, what is his sourcing? I think his sourcing was probably very good, and I think you do as well.
Well, his sourcing is good, but he tends to give out exactly what the government wants us to know, shaped and colored and through the lens that they want us to see it, rather than the way I'm looking at it right now.
A little less critical.
Clear lenses.
Yes, a little less critical, a little less skeptical than what you would be. Accepts what he's fed and gives it back the way that is favorable to the people giving it.
So I spent months trying to reach Arkin.
Okay,
wouldn't reply to me. Well, he finally did several months ago, and I said, I want to talk to you about this story. Secret commandos with shoot to kill orders. I kid you not, Kyle. This was his response. What story with shoot to kill orders?
What do you make of that?
I went and copied the link and sent him the link. I said, does this remind you of anything? Got your byline. Oh, yeah, well, no, they weren't there. And I went, well, wait a minute. This line in your story says that while we know that elements of the United States military were there, we still don't know what their orders were. So you're changing your story now and saying they weren't there? Yeah, no, they weren't there. I said, what about our buddies down at Belvoir and up at Meade? And he said, he called them by one of their other names. I forget which one. There's a list of 7 or 8 or 10.
Yeah, like the activity or something.
Yeah, anyway, he called them by one of their names, and he said, no, they weren't there. And I went, But, and he's like, I mean, just very defensive. And then he goes, "Are you trying to set me up for something?" And I went, "No, I'm trying to maybe collaborate with you on something. I know some things through my own sourcing. You apparently know some things through your sourcing. If we want to get to the truth of this thing, maybe we could share." And he's like, I don't have anything to talk about."
What do you think the possible explanations for not remembering that story? Because that's a pretty interesting story. It's certainly an interesting byline. I mean, it's an interesting title, rather.
Yeah. Well, it's a very provocative title. There's no way he doesn't remember that.
That being said, editors choose to those generally, right? Editors
Correct.
choose titles. So
yeah, but it's not like he didn't see it.
I would think so. Yeah.
Right. And it's, as I said, it's a pretty provocative, and a guy who, and to be fair, and I've been told this by my own editors who have been doing this for decades, that they've forgotten more of their headlines than they will ever recall.
Right.
But that one's a little special. Secret commandos with shoot to kill orders. I think I might remember that I wrote that story. Only 2.5 years later, I think I might have remembered that.
So what are the possibilities that you think are the reason for him not remembering it or not claiming to remember it? Put them in any order you want, from most likely to least likely. But I'm really curious on how you assess that to be the case when he talked to you.
There's always the possibility he just didn't write the story. It was submitted to him. His byline was added to it, and it was published.
Seems like the most likely to me as well.
Let's just stop there.
And that should tell people something, though, if that's probable. And I don't know that it's the most probable, but it's certainly very plausible. That tells people a little bit about the media environment that we're dealing with.
Especially media who act as mockingbird mouthpieces of our federal agencies.
Right. Now, maybe a bit of an aside, do you have an instinct on how that goes down? Because I don't think that they're getting direct orders like, hey, now you are going to report for us and say our stories. Do you know what the quid pro quo probably looks like?
It's I will help you get this information and this news out if you'll make me your primary source when you really got something good. It's not like I haven't done that for Congress members. This doesn't mean that I'm going to post a lie, but if you need something that I believe in amplified, you have something, and I'm like, okay, that's good. And I vet it and I validate it through my own sourcing, and I believe that it's a true story. Yes, I will help you get this out. So for instance, when we do something like that, we'll get advance notice that they're about to release a special investigative report or a particular name of somebody that they are finally going to out for whatever reason in a scandal. Then they'll release that to a preferred news agency that will help them amplify that. And so we'll get the opportunity, usually not to necessarily beat we might get the scoop by a few hours, but they'll give us an advance copy of the report so we can have our story prepared. And then simultaneously with the congressional release of the report, we already have a story that we've already vetted and we've already done the backgrounds on, and we've already gotten comments from the main characters in the congressional investigative report. And then we're out first, and then everybody else jumps on it, by that afternoon.
Right.
Okay.
So people can understand what the mechanics look like in the background. I imagine it going something along the lines of, hey, here's this report. It's coming out. I'd like to give you access to a couple of people that are going to give a talk. Treat as friendly, Steve. Yeah. And they already know that you're going to be ideologically sympathetic to the thing that's being discussed.
Sure.
So you're selecting your source and your outlet based on knowing what they're going to want to slant towards anyway. Yeah. Generally speaking, those people slant the way that they write. So you're not having someone write against their principles. And you choose your source to vet it out there. And again, treat as friendly is kind of a little inside thing where you just say, this one's coming into you, and they think the same way you do. They're on the same team.
And look, I will be honest with you. Just yesterday, as part of this ongoing investigation, and this monster that we're investigating, is I had new information I just acquired on, again, I don't know which day this is going to drop, this particular interview, but on January 1st was yesterday in our time at the taping of this. So New Year's Day was yesterday, and on New Year's Day yesterday, I was on the phone with multiple congressional staffers and congressional investigators because of something that I found that blows my mind, and they're on the Hill. I need your help. And one of them in particular was able to actually access congressional records that I don't have access to validate what I discovered.
Let's talk about Task Force Orange in the crowd. We got a lot of background on it. I think we're hyping people a little bit. So let's give them some of the meat here.
Okay. So let's say that they were or were not. Doesn't matter whether they were there or not. They are just one of our federal group of operatives, special operatives, either in the intelligence community, which, by the way, they go both ways. They actually even validated and confirmed by the Newsweek article that we referred to, is that they can be what is called seconded, or seconded is how it looks like. I think the pronunciation is seconded. They can be seconded to either the FBI or the CIA and take their orders directly from the intelligence community. That's correct. I've seen the flowchart from them.
And is that done through a memorandum of understanding through DOD and those agencies?
That's correct. They can, the individual Orange member can be directly operating under a CIA or FBI MOU.
And what authorities are they granted based on doing that?
When they do it, if they're operating in a jurisdiction which is illegal for them to be operating in, they become at that moment what is required, what is called, this is what the DOD calls it. They become let me get the phrase exactly right. Oh, I can't believe I'm having a brain fart here, Kyle. They become here it is, ostensibly separated from the Army.
Ostensibly separated is the terminology.
The actual legal phraseology. They, during the time that they're operating under a CIA MOU and behind some, border where we're not supposed to be, they're ostensibly separated from the Army at that time. Unfortunately, which they do have to admit, is that when they are working under an FBI MOU, where they're also not supposed to be operating in the United States, they become ostensibly separated from the Army during that period.
This has, not knowing it and not having worked with it, it sounds like the secretary will disavow all knowledge. You are a now plausibly deniable asset. Yeah. You will be, your mission, should you choose not to accept it, sort of thing. I mean, that's what this sounds like. This sounds like government language for that.
And this is a great jumping off point, because in the same manner that the secretary would deny their existence, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or anybody else in the hierarchy and command structure would deny their existence. It's the same idea when the CIA, faced with, as we just learned a few days ago from Catherine Herridge's report about directed energy weapons, euphemistically known as creating a disease called the Havana syndrome. And those are technically called anomalous health incidences, AHIs. Mm-hmm. That the fact that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of our State Department and foreign officers legally deployed by the United States, including intelligence operatives overseas, have developed these AHIs, anomalous health incidences, and are suing the government for health coverage, because they're being denied treatment because the CIA denies the very existence of the weapons, which is hilarious on its face because, for starters, Kyle, we can go to YouTube right now and I can pull up a DOD video demonstrating truck-mounted LRADs. These are crowd control devices that can operate either with sound or heat. So let's be a little more specific. They can operate with microwave or radio energy, or they can operate with audio energy. They can operate on the audio side with subaudible energy that will make you think you are losing your mind and you've got so much pain in your head you just go to your knees. Or they can broadcast it with super audible at 137 decibels and make you turn and run from the sound. It's so loud. Or they can flash you with one of the RF weapons, microwave. They can just do a flash burst of an RF energy pulse, and everybody that's in that wide angle array of the beam thinks their skin is on fire, and they turn and run. So the fact,
and this is public knowledge, folks. This is open source. It's not difficult to find this information that they have these crowd control weapons, and they've been out there for a little while at least. Now,
what we also know exists, I can take you right now. I have it up on my screen. I can take you to CIA.gov. Write it down, folks. It's really easy. CIA.gov. And I can show you thousands of now declassified documents in their public archives about the development of these weapons going all the way back to the 50s in the Soviet Union. They referred to them as psychotronic weapons at the time. Fast forward to 1973, we have a Scientific American article which is talking about the miniaturization now of these weapons and how that they can make you disoriented, they can make you confused, they can give you tremendous bouts of vertigo, they can stop your heart. Depending upon the frequency and the modulation of that frequency, they can create different effects in the human mind. These are technologies that have been researched for around 70 plus, almost 80 years. And in 91, when the Soviet Union fell, one of the things that we were very active in was buying technologies from Soviet scientists at the time. Our good friend J. Michael Waller was in the actual frickin' Kremlin the day the Soviet Union fell. Immediately after that, part of what he was doing was negotiating with Soviet scientists because these guys, they lost their income, right? There's no government, there's no job, there's no pay. They're just selling on the open market to whoever will buy it, what they know. And one of the things that just came out are you ready for this, Kyle? May 8th, write it down, folks. May 8th, 2024, an open congressional hearing. We have are you writing this down? Oh, no,
I'm grabbing a coffee. I'm ready to.
May 8th, 2024, not even a year ago, open congressional hearing. A European, well, he says he's a journalist, but in that community, journalist is often just a euphemism for, he's a spook. So he testified before our Congress that in 91, when all of this was happening, the buying and selling of technologies from the Soviet Union, that he personally examined what was called a backpack DEW weapon. The United States has taken that technology, advanced it much further, and operating at roughly or maybe exactly a 74 gigahertz level. They've gotten the power and energy requirements miniaturized now to a backpack size. They can put the antenna in the breastplate of your, your military kit, as they call them, your
plate carrier.
Yeah. So they can put the breastplate in, or the antenna in the breastplate of your body armor. And the unit, which includes the battery and the unit itself, weigh about 50 pounds total. And you can set the directional use of it to where it's vertical, has a vertical array beam, and in the vertical array, that can be used to target an individual. You can set it then for a horizontal beam, which gives you a wide array. And you can affect as many people that are in that beam's, area at a time, coming from a single backpack unit.
Where's this information coming from? Your understanding of the use of the weapon?
This is coming directly from the individuals who participated in the design of this weapon with DARPA.
You're sourcing
the perfection of this weapon, the technologies that we bought from the Soviet Union.
And how long have we had that kind of functionality, or have members of the government have access to that sort of capability?
Oh, we've been doing Havana syndrome activities against them for as long as they've been doing it against us.
Sure.
It's a tit-for-tat thing. I mean,
I'm interested in the miniaturizing. If there was a plan for backpack unit 1991 purchase, fall of the Soviet Union, roughly, if you have an idea, was it in the 90s? Was it the early 2000s when this became a functional sort of non-prototype?
Functional among our special operators in the late 90s.
Late 90s. Okay.
Yeah. A useful weapon, 97, 98.
And have you talked to people that have used this?
Yes.
Overseas?
Overseas.
Domestically?
We are told by very high-ranking, retired Army sources that, and this is an exact quote, that they are regularly and prolifically used by our special forces, both overseas and domestically, that they are regularly and prolifically tested on our forces here domestically. A 3-star general, through a cutout, told me, and this is an exact quote, "Yes, that weapon exists. With it, we can stop your heart. We can make you shit your pants. But I wouldn't need that on January 6th. All I would need is 4 or 5 of my best men to make January 6th happen." Quote, unquote.
How long, just for people to get a sense of your investment in this particular story, how long have you been pursuing this as a pretty aggressive project?
It'll be 4 years next month.
So just after January 6th, starting in February of 21.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And this has been something that I've heard from you. Is it going on years now? Does that sound right?
Yeah, a couple of years for you and me.
Yeah, we've been only talking for maybe 2 years and change. And
Right.
I feel like I've heard about it for most of that time. And it's not something you immediately told me, but you were thinking about it earlier.
Right.
All right.
We've not been prepared to go public with this before now. We actually, we actually used Catherine Herridge's whistleblower release a few days ago. Look, and everyone should know, and by the way, I'm not disparaging Catherine at all. There is nothing that she has revealed that's not already open source. 100% of everything that she talked about is in the public domain. Google it, look it up. It's out there.
Yes.
We're not talking about UFOs. We're not talking about tinfoil hat stuff. We're talking about. I have through my sources, through the engineers, the actual guys who have assisted in the development of this weapon. I said I wanted to break this down to three basic three components that I can use layman's terms that people can understand. So let me do that with you right now.
All right. So, Steve, we're talking about a technology that sounds relatively complicated. We're going to break this down. You're going to give it to us layman's terms, maybe?
Yeah, I want to do this, and I asked the engineers that are sources that have participated in the development and use of this particular directed energy weapon. They don't even like using that terminology. They have other phrases that they like to use. But and some of the technical guys out there that are watching this right now, or will see this or hear about it and then come back and review this, they'll be critical because I don't use all of the perfect phraseology and terminology. But I specifically asked them to break this down for me so that I could convey it in layman's terms and so that we could all understand it. So I asked them, I want to present the categories of these weapons into three different categories, and they broke it down for me in such a way that they all agreed, said, okay, yes, we can live with that in conveying this information. First of all, must be said that absolutely nothing they are giving me is classified. The weapons systems itself are highly classified. They won't give me the exact name and model number of the weapons that they're using. But I have been able to, on my own, construct together the history of these weapons in such a way that when I present it with them, they can go, yep, all right, got us there, because I don't operate under the same rules that they do as a journalist. As a journalist, I can say whatever I find. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. They can't. If they have used it, they have built it in a classified setting, they can't talk about it. And they don't. These are guys that honor their oaths, even after the retirement. Even the guys that we're talking to that are still active duty, honoring their oaths. For instance, before I go into the three categories, something that we learned just last week from a very high-ranking active duty officer in the Army. He was in the room in October of last year when October of 24, when retired General, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, was bragging to a group of officers that he authorized both heat and audio weapons at Lafayette Square Park in D.C. in June of 2020. So, with that in mind, myself and my partner in crime at the Blaze, Joe Hanneman, we started digging into congressional and federal open source documents, and we found a Department of the Interior IG report. You ready for this, Kyle? A Department of the Interior IG report, which said, in fact, verifies that not only were LRAD DEWs authorized for use in Lafayette Square on June 1st of 2020, they were in fact used, and that people were running away screaming and confused. Federal document, open source, Department of the Interior. Why was it Department of the Interior? Because it was loaned to the United States Park Police for use.
Let's do that real slowly for people. The White House itself is part of a National Park Service area, and the operative police force there is the United States Park Police. They're the only people that fly over the National Mall. They have responsibility for the National Mall outside of Congress and the Ellipse and the North Lawn. That's U.S. Park Police territory. The IG for the Interior would handle U.S. Park Police investigations. That's the parent organization. Interior is the department, and you get down all the way to the bureau that runs U.S. Park Police. That's your smaller agency.
Yes.
And you have an IG report. Does it have tell me what the report has in it for specifics?
Okay, folks, we're stepping away for just 1 second. We're going to say thanks to our friends over at Patriot Protect. Just to remind you, they are bringing you this long-form conversation if you want to get protected so that you don't get scammed by all those out there that are nefarious actors. You can do so by going to kyle.patriot-protect.com. Again, kyle.patriot-protect.com. A powerful security service that is going to help scrub your name, your face, your identity, that you don't need out there running around on data brokers, on people who are trying to sell your information to all the scammers, the robocallers, the debt collectors. I signed up. It's fast and easy. It takes like maybe 10, 15 minutes tops. By the time you're done with it, you don't even feel like you've taken any time. And I've probably saved that much time not answering stupid robocalls. I got more than one phone. I got one for the business and one for myself. So I think my wife is going to be up next. It's supposed to make you invisible to cyber criminals. We'll see, but so far so good. I haven't had any issues. And also it's going to block scammers. It's going to secure your location, so your address is not out there in the world for people to show up and bother you and your kids and the rest of your family. You can protect yourself against debt collectors, weirdos, scammers, identity theft folks, phishing, all that. You guys can save 15% on an annual subscription. It's Kyle, Kyle, saving yourself 15%. Just go to, again, kyle.patriot-protect.com. Let's get right back into this with my friend Steve Baker.
Very specifically that the LRAD weapon was deployed and that it was used. And we found in the report, 80-page report, there's photos, and Kyle, it was the backpack version.
And you saw pictures of the backpack.
We have this was a major mistake by Department of the Interior to release this, because I can take that photo, I can send it to the CIA, and the CIA will say, that doesn't exist. I don't know what you're looking at there.
What about your sources?
They looked at it and told me exactly what it was. Model number, frequency range, blah, 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 blah. I said, is this sub audio or is this super audio? Don't know. It depends on whether it has the switch setting on it or not. Because all they can see is the backpack and the wires. They can't see the device itself in the photos.
What degree of certainty? We talk about confidence. What level of confidence do they have that they're correct?
Oh, I mean, they're 100% correct because this is an open source weapon. This is not a hidden weapon.
Yeah.
That's category number one. We said we're going to give the 3 categories. That's category number 1. These are riot control weapons. As I said, you can go look at the Defense Department videos and see the big, tank and Humvee mounted giant array shield LRADs, and they with Congress members taking a pulse from it. I mean, oh God, and they feel like they're, that their whole exposed side of their body was set on fire for a split second. It's just like, if we could put our hands in the microwave, what it would feel like. Or if you're a Dunaphile like me, the Bene Gesserit Gom Jabbar, when they put their hand into the box, what's in the box? Pain.
Yes.
So if you saw Paul Moadib do that in the Dune movie, both Dune movies. So that's essentially what was happening with not that particular weapon. The IG report reveals what we believe was just the audio version of the weapon. I don't know if the RF, which is the microwave version, was used or not. But according to our current active duty high-ranking officer, U.S. Army, who heard Milley bragging about it just this past October, he authorized the use of both of them. All right. Now, my head is so full of this information. I'm working without notes right now, by the way. So I hope that we don't leave out anything important. But let's go to class number 2. So first class is riot control weapons. All right. The class number 2 is what we'll define as what is as been referred to as the Havana syndrome weapons. These are the types of weapons that are specifically designed to harm someone in a very meaningful and either can be short-term or long-term way. It can do permanent damage or it can do have temporary bad effects on an individual. This particular version of the weapon is a 74 megahertz RF weapon that, depending upon the modulation of the frequency, this is the easiest way I can explain it. All right, you're driving down the road in your 1978 pickup truck. You got an antenna, a steel antenna, right? It picks up radio waves through a fairly broad range of AM and FM radio signals. And it resonates. So the actual antenna, the wave passes through everything else. It doesn't affect us at all. We don't feel or are affected by AM and FM signals at all. But that antenna, the waves don't pass through it. It resonates at that band of signals and then sends that resonance into your receiver, your radio. And, it used to be buttons, click, 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 in that 78 pickup truck, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd have the AM switch on or the FM switch on and then punch some buttons for my presets for my favorite music radio stations back then. The human body also resonates at certain frequencies, and the wave will not pass through. At a certain frequency, they can stop you from breathing by attacking by sending and pointing a pencil-like ray of that RF frequency directly at you as you're exiting your home or exiting your place of work, your embassy in Havana, whatever, going to your car, going to a bus, taxi. They can hold that on you, and suddenly you develop breathing problems because that particular frequency resonates with your lungs. Or they can give you heart problems by selecting the frequency for that laser-like pencil beam ray at your heart. Or they can aim it at your head. And depending upon the modulation, the different folds of the brain itself that operate and react to or control various functions of our body, it can be aimed at the brain, and the different folds will be affected by the modulation from that 74 gigahertz center, and can create confusion, can lobotomize you, drive you insane, temporary insanity, make you hear voices in your head. Depending upon what modulation they use, that affects which brain fold or brain center or lobe or whatever that is sensitive to that modulation. And this is specifically of those, if you're following, and you can follow it. I told you, congressional hearing, go look it up. May 8th this year. It's on C-SPAN. I've watched it about 5 times now. I've got the transcript. I've reached out to all the witnesses on the committee hearing. This is not science fiction, folks. They've been doing that to us for years. We've been doing that to them for years.
When you say us and them, who do you mean?
China and Russia, most likely to us, and United States to China and anybody else we don't like. Iran.
Okay.
We've been doing that.
Who else do we think has this kind of technology, if you have any sense?
I think that the only powers capable are probably those 3. And then certainly, we know that the Brits do, because the Brits actually, one particular version of this class 2 weapon that I'm talking about, it used to require a very large power source, because the attacker is doing this from hundreds of meters away, and the power source was very large. So that basically you had to have the big van kind of thing.
Yeah. And
the Brits were able to miniaturize that back in the 90s to backpack style themselves. So
about Israel?
I haven't looked into what Israel's capabilities are, but if the Brits have it, Israel has it.
Stands to reason. Okay, fair enough. Just kind of curious about how terrified we all need to be of these things running out there in the world.
So when you examine the victims, or the alleged victims, are what the CIA denies to this day to be victims of Havana syndrome or AHIs, anomalous health incidences overseas, the individuals that are being attacked by this are not DEI hires, by the way. These are important people. These are people with real jobs that they don't like, be it in the Havana embassy or Moscow embassy, or unfortunately, as has been revealed by the witnesses in congressional testimony on May 8th of 2024, that these devices are regularly being used in and around Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland.
And we think it's foreign powers operating them domestically here?
They are saying in that committee hearing that their work has shown that our IC community has been tracking foreign powers with these devices, using them on U.S. soil. This is all open source, folks.
Yeah.
Again, now, with that stated, we get to class 3.
Okay. So one of them is overt riot control. One is covert mind and or autonomic nervous system interference.
Correct.
Now we're in class 3.
Class 3 does the exact opposite of class 1. It's called an agitation weapon. It can take somebody that is observing a riot, who has never had a history of violence in their life. They've never been arrested for anything. They've never had a moment of domestic violence in their life. In fact, they were a lieutenant colonel in the Army. They were a major in the Air Force. They were 40 years or 30 years on the fire department and seen death and destruction. They don't react to anything like that. Seen violence all over the place. They were law enforcement, retired law enforcement. Never spotless record. And in a riot, suddenly they throw themselves into battle. And then in tears in their sentencing hearing, they break down before the judge and say, Your Honor, I'd never behaved like this before in my life. I don't know what came over me. I have no idea. But that device, if you have PTSD, will make you go crazy. That's directly from the developers of the weapon to me, to my ears. They can make you lose your shit, or as the 3-star general told me through a cutout, can stop your heart. We can make you shit your pants. Yes, it exists.
What kind of testimony were you listening to? Because I know you attended a lot of the J6 trials. What kind of instinct did you have that this might have played a role? Or is it even necessary for what happened on that day?
It's not necessary, as that same 3-star general said, but I wouldn't need that to make January 6th happen.
Why not?
I just need 4 or 5 of my best guys. What does he mean by that?
What does he mean?
Oh, this is a general very much involved on the JSOC side. And this is what they do overseas. They start riots. It's called color revolutions. We've done hundreds of them all over the world. Our special operators are expert at it. CIA, expert at it. TFO, expert at it. TFO sees a kid by the name of Thomas Crooks on J13, 2024, and they see their own handiwork.
Tell me more about that.
My encrypted DMs exploded after Thomas Crooks took that shot at President Trump, saying, this is what we do overseas, right? We recruit.
What are the elements of that, though? So, because there's a lot of conspiratorial people in this space. Right. Would you agree?
We recruit, we groom disaffected young men in jurisdictions all over the world. Most of them are never activated, but we just have them prepared in case something presents itself someday. And this is what they believe that they see in Thomas Crooks, much more so than Ryan Routh from Greensboro, North Carolina, who was found at the golf course, down in Florida. And the point being is that all of these things, whether Crooks was groomed by one of our special operators or not, is really not. It doesn't matter. Let's just say it wasn't. The point is this is what we do. This is what our special forces do. We use electronic means, psychotronic means. We all know about the history of psychotropic weapons testing by our own government on our own people as a particular. I probably should have had another screen going with all of my notes here so I could get these quotes exactly. Basically, we have a very, very deep, long, and dark history of testing weapon systems on our own people here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Open source, folks. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not Alex Jones. This is not tinfoil hat stuff. Do I yet know and have absolute 100% empirical evidence and proof, photographically or otherwise, that one of these backpack weapons was used on January 6, 2021? I do not. Let's just state that. I do not have that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
What I do know is that not only does it exist, I do know that people that know how to use it were in the crowd that day. And I do know that the people that were in that crowd and know how to use it didn't need it to make January 6th happen.
And what would they do if they didn't need it, but still wanted to affect the outcome?
Let's quote something found by one of your buddies.
Okay. And
when I say buddies, in quotes, James O'Keefe, back in Project Veritas days, 2016, undercover sting video operation. Not one of his grinder videos, though, by the way.
Noted.
All right. They interviewed a guy by the name of Aaron Black. Aaron Black was one of the prime organizers of Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street. All right. He is a professional riot instigator. His job, working 2 levels disconnected from the DNC, as found on video, is his job was to, in fact, incite riots and violent incidences at Trump rallies. His job during the 2016 election cycle between Clinton and Trump was they showed the spreadsheet. This is where Trump's going to be. This is where Pence is going to be, and our operatives will be all there. Our provocateurs will be there. We were always first in line, lined up at 6 o'clock in the morning. We will always be in the front. The big incidences that happened, like where it got really out of control once in Chicago, and where these guys were punching people out at those rallies. Remember those things? That's all their guys. They're all paid agitators. His name's Aaron Black. Write it down, folks. Now go look up Aaron Black. On January 6th, Aaron Black was Nancy Pelosi's chief political advisor. Professional riot agitator is her chief political advisor.
Do you know when he was hired?
What's that?
Do you know when he was hired on?
I don't know when he was hired on, but I know that he was working for a private foundation called Democracy Defenders in 2016. They were, not a pack, not a thing, but they were 2 layers separated from the candidates and the and he even says on the Project Veritas reveal, he said, he said, I don't like doing these. And he's otherwise he's very much a ghost. He got caught. He said, I don't like talking about this stuff because nobody is supposed to know who I am and what I do and what my job is. But what I do is I make shit happen at Trump rallies. His partner, Occupy Wall Street, was Van Jones.
The Van Jones?
The Van Jones.
Wow. I really enjoy his acting. He's an enjoyable actor to watch on CNN.
Right. So there's a lot of angles that were coming at January 6th. There's still a lot of unknowns, but I'm not prepared yet to lay this name on everybody. But we're in the vetting process right now, and I think we're going to get there, just like we finally got there. It took me 2 years. David Lazarus. David Lazarus was 1 year to the day from when I heard his testimony. Oh, not when I heard when I heard his name mentioned for the first time. It was 1 year to the day that we finally released his story. It takes that long. People were mad at me. They got mad at me and said, you know, people's lives were being destroyed by the DOJ while you sat on that story. Folks, it doesn't work that way. Yeah, a social media influencer can run out there and drop shit like that into the airways without vetting it, without running it through 3 editors and legal counsel and all the other things that you have to run it by to make sure that it's accurate. But then once you get the whiff of the crime, then you got to start investigating. I mean, how many times have you worked on just because you know the bad guy's right there, you have to build the case against him. You know what he did.
And sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes there's more to it, and it turns out that it's not incriminating. It's it's gonna set them free. It's gonna destroy the piece that you have, because there's one little thing that you didn't know. We have an interesting culture right now. I dealt with it this morning before we talked. People see 2 points and they see a line. Mm-hmm. 2 points are 2 points until you can build all the points in between. Right. In geometry, very simply, 3 points determine a plane. It takes two points, you can determine a line, but that only is the line of the best fit of 2. And when you've ever done with multiple points, getting them all on the same line means that there is actually a formula that runs between them. We can actually define it. So you've got to be able to find that formula. And a lot of times people don't wait for the formula. They don't do the regression. They simply look and see, hey, there's 2 things, they're connected because these 2 people were on the same military base at the same time. Well, guess what? I probably was on the same military base at that time, and you might have been too, and you were a civilian. You could have driven by and been on Fort Bragg. There's 100,000 people that go to work there every single day. So
they saw the FBI arrive at Mar-a-Lago at 9:30 in the morning and determined that was going to be the shootout at the Mar-a-Lago Corral, and that was an assassination attempt, literally, quote unquote. That's what it was an assassination attempt.
Simply because they read a couple of words out of context without knowing anything about the background. So yes, let's talk about some bad actors that's been in this space, because this is the other problem. There's a credibility gap between press, between government. We've talked about government giving the defendants, I think, an unfair shake. They've weighed in on the process and they've forgotten what their job is, that their job is simply to present the information without regard to outcome in the trial. That's ugly, but it's been happening. We've seen the media weigh in, whether it be on the left, trying to push a narrative that's favorable to the government, on the right, people trying to get the story. Every J6er is a political prisoner. You and I, in our first podcast ever, we talked about the American Rorschach test. I feel like that resonated with you at the time. I imagine it probably still does. When you tell me that you know everything about an event, I know more about you than you know about the event, generally speaking. It just tells me more about how you look at the world. Yeah. Because you and I both know that there are shades of gray. There are all kinds of things that happen. You've got information now, but none of those things are conclusive.
Right.
We've presented some information that is interesting, that could shade. And are you hopeful that people might come and say, hey, you know what, I know more about this, or hey, I've got a picture of that backpack, and like I saw that guy, or whatever.
That's exactly why we're releasing.
Yeah.
Okay. What we know, in quick review, what we know beyond any shadow of a doubt, confirmed by other media sources, is that elements of our military were present, embedded in the crowd on January 6th. For nefarious purposes, I don't know. Maybe they were there for all the right reasons. Mm-hmm. Maybe. We know beyond any shadow of a doubt that the tactical units of every 3-letter federal agency was in and around the Capitol. I have the ATF showing up on my camera less than 5 minutes after Ashley Babbitt was shot. They were fricking in the building already. They were there. FBI, HRT, they were in the building already. Seen the videos. You haven't seen it. You have to go watch Russian TV to see FBI tactical units escorting Congress members down into the tunnels. But I've seen it. The things that we know is that class 1, as I defined them, of these directed energy weapons, crowd control versions, were in fact authorized for deployment by, they were used by the United States Park Police. The IG report says that they were loaned to them by the Metropolitan Police. That's what it says. But we have eyewitness, ear witness testimony in the same room. I can even give you the exact date that it happened, when former Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley says that he authorized the use of both heat and sound weapons at Lafayette Square Park in the summer of 2020. All right. The IG report, we now know that it was a backpack version identified by the IG themselves. All right. I had to get there eventually. We know that beyond any shadow of a doubt. We know beyond any shadow of a doubt that these weapons have been in development for since the 50s, at least, by the Soviet Union, under the title of psychotronic weapons. That's both heat and sound, by the way. Otherwise, radio frequency and audio frequency. All right. On the radio side, we know that they have what they call ultrasound, infrasound. That's on the audio side. On the RF side, the microwave side, it's a vast description of names and nuanced technologies that they have developed on that side. Much more frightening, by the way.
Yeah.
But also not frightening. Also some very incredible technologies that are, it's like the equivalent of Elon Musk's Neuralink. Everybody's like, oh, you're not going to put a chip in my head. Yeah. What if you're a quadriplegic and you can suddenly walk and use your arms again?
No, exactly. Yeah.
Right?
There's obviously going to be, if you have the ability to control autonomic nerves, how about people that have lost that ability? Can you re-stimulate it? Can you fix a heart, a heart abnormality, or can you deal with an arrhythmia?
Right.
So yeah,
what if you've got somebody 10 miles away on the other side of a battlefield, in fact, across enemy lines, and you don't dare use conventional radio to try and communicate with them because all of that's being monitored, and you need to send your guys an order 10 miles away. What if you can send him a narrow beam and he just hears you talking in his head, and he's the only one, because it's not a radio signal. It is, but it's on a laser and carried at a laser beam width only to your head, and your commander can now give you the orders, and you hear your commander's voice. No receiving. By the way, there's no receiver. He's talking to your head. That's a very positive, and classified development. But what if somebody's talking to a crazy person and they think they're hearing the voice of God to go kill somebody?
Right.
In their head. They don't know where it's coming from. They're not wearing any devices, but somebody's telling them what to do in their head.
There's a comedian that does a bit about this, by the way. Not this specifically, not the technology, but he said, back in the old days, it seemed like God was a lot more active in the world. He used to go speak to the prophets. And what did the prophets all say? They were like, no, I can't. Like, no, I can't. He's like, if you watched a guy walking down the street right now in New York City, and he was walking around, he was looking around and just going, no, I can't. No, I can't. You'd think he was crazy. He's schizophrenic. He needs to be taken into custody, and we need to be protected from him. So how interesting that they actually can mimic that sort of thing. It's a biblical power that we're talking about. I mean, again, the power for good or for evil, being able to manipulate, because it's the one thing that we think that we actually have control over. And more we learn that we don't, that we're victims of our own food source and the calories that we're bringing in. We're victims of the sort of the things that we're consuming, whether it be sound or video or press documentation. And imagine that just taken to the next level, which is that you didn't even consume it. It's just being targeted to you, which is what these AHI things. That's a very, walking away feeling sick all the time is a light version than thinking that somebody is speaking in your head and giving you special knowledge when you never went there and solicited that or implanted anything. It's crazy.
And to conclude my summary, we know beyond any shadow of a doubt that Mark Milley authorized the use of those weapons in June of 2020.
Which is really crazy because I was there the next day.
The same general who was not allowing his subordinates to authorize the use of the National Guard. Same general, same guy. So if he authorized it to be in D.C. at Lafayette Square, why wouldn't he authorize that class of backpack directed energy weapons to be authorized for use on January 6th, either at the Ellipse or at the Capitol? It's a fair question. It's also a very fair question because we know now from congressional testimony, transcripted under oath, that these generals denied Trump's authorization. And we also know that Trump actually used the words to keep the city safe. 3 days on January 3rd. And two of those generals, a 3-star and a 4-star, said, no effing way are we going to give Trump command over 10,000 National Guard troops, because they thought he was going to invoke the Insurrection Act. They thought Trump was going to overthrow the government that day.
Mm-hmm.
And
what authority did they have to do that?
They don't.
Yeah, I have this weird concept of a commander-in-chief. I don't know what that means, I guess.
Yeah, no, they absolutely do not. They actually committed insurrection in that moment. They were treasonous in that moment. And as you know, we released that story, my interview with Casey Wardynski, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, of the Army, rather. He was on the teleconference call, secure call with them. They were using his unit from his office. He had 2 3-stars and 1 4-star on one side. On the other side, he had the National Guard commander who was saying, we are, as you said, we're sitting on our hats. We're ready to go. Ready to go. They're on the bus. He goes, my guys are ready to go. Quote unquote, chomping at the bit is what I think is General Walker said. The guys on the other side said, no, we don't like the optics. And then under oath, under transcribed interview, they said, even Chris Miller, the acting Sec Def, said, not a chance in hell was I going to give Trump control of 10,000 troops that day. His own acting Sec Def said that. Didn't say it in his book. That's what he said under oath, though.
Really interesting.
So, to answer your question earlier, we're putting this out here for one reason and one reason only. Call me. Call me.
Yeah.
Let's get it all out there. Let's get the truth. If you're on the ground that day, call me. If you know more about this than I know about it, call me. Particularly as it relates to January 6th. Because in those sentencing hearings of dozens of individuals have said, Your Honor, I don't know what came over me that day. All the way up to lieutenant colonels, former retired Air Force pilots, law enforcement, retired, firemen, normal people, civilians. Don't know what came over me that day. Never behaved that way in my life. Now, There are people who know how to do that without a directed energy weapon. They know how to get a crowd going. They know how to elicit bad behavior. They know how to get people riled up and to throw themselves into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise do. What was the first thing that I ever told you the first time we ever met? I guarantee you, because I rarely do a long form interview that I don't use this phrase. What I saw on January 6th, I saw 3 different types of people that day. I saw bad people doing bad things. I saw good people doing good things. I also saw otherwise good people doing some really stupid stuff. And that's true on both sides of the police line, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
We also had 3 people whose heart stopped in a very small space, less than 100 yards apart from each other. I don't know what the statistical anomaly of that happening is. I can't recall an event ever that has happened. I can't recall a BLM riot, Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, New York City, Raleigh, North Carolina. But in a period of 2.5 hours, 3 different people's hearts stopped.
That makes you think.
Greason, Philip, Boylan.
Yeah.
I don't know of another event where that's ever happened before.
I can't think of one either. I was just thinking of the stuff that went on in DC or the stuff that happened in 2020. I don't recall that being the case. And they were, you have to evaluate the demographics of the crowd. That was different of the MAGA group versus those who were on the hard left.
There were older people.
But there were, in all those places, there were people that were out of shape and otherwise, would be exerted and taxed.
But these individuals were, 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
One of them was talking to his wife on the phone when he dropped dead. It's like that. That happened before the first less than lethal weapon was ever fired. The people that are saying he's murdered are lying. That's our people on the right. Our pundits and our gateway pundits and our, Tommy Tatums and people like that continue to parade around those signs of those individuals and saying that literally on the poster say that they were murdered by the Capitol Police. That's what they say. And that's absolutely not true. Roseanne Boylan, we can argue about. The other 2, they never got hit by a less than lethal.
Mm-hmm.
But they dropped dead of a heart attack. So when, the other the other name of these particular weapons are non-kinetic devices.
That's a euphemism, isn't it?
They don't leave a entry or exit wound.
Well, that's absolutely terrifying. There's just, what else you do with that? It's something that has no exit, no entry. There's no defense against it. You're not going to walk around wearing a Faraday cage. I guess you could, but
and our CIA says that they don't exist.
Despite,
I'm sorry. I got a YouTube video right here, and it says DOD, and it's a congressman standing out there taking the hit from the wave. Yeah, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I've seen those videos, and I'm sure a lot of our audience has as well. So the concept of a directed energy weapon,
right,
is certainly not foreign to most of us at this point. They were something they were playing around with that I remember very publicly. What is the date on that video? The congressional walkout, and
I think that there are actual. I'll tell you what.
Is it like 08, 09, something like that? 2010.
The earlier than that, even in the 90s, but we had back before CNN was the communist news network, and they were actually doing real news back in the early and mid 80s. Mm-hmm. They actually did a 3-part series on directed energy waves and their effect as they were used and known to be used at the time on the mind.
I've seen that. I think you shared it with me.
Yep, I have probably.
It's a guy sitting there and he was like, I had the strangest feeling. I could, I had a sensation. I had a color or an image or something that was projected to him, and they were trying to figure out what it was stimulating.
He could actually tell you the shape of the wave that was attacking him.
Right. And they were showing the waveform on one end through some oscilloscope or something like that, or whatever the hell these like,
and
you know,
he could draw it for you.
No, I remember because you shared it with me, but it's like, okay, yeah, it's hard. I mean, obviously you could fake footage like that, but I don't think they did. I think it's stuff that aired because people were just genuinely curious. We're talking about a technology that had, as you said, power to help, power to harm.
Yeah.
It was during the time when we were bragging about how advanced we were as a society and why no one was going to keep up with us. And this is why you don't screw with America, because America's got all the things. We can even project things into your mind.
We were talking about Star Wars, we were talking about, and not the movie, by the way.
Yeah.
We were talking about particle beam technology. That was the one that got me. I loved that, reading that in the science magazines and reading the descriptions of that back in the late 70s and early 80s. And
then you ended up with stories coming out like the Ender's Game series talking about, and those were all the same thing, the phallotic connections or whatever, these sort of like particle beam sort of vibrations on the that whole science fiction series, Ender series. So okay. So that was a time. There was a time in history when we were fascinated with this, and I recall it, at least even as a child reading about it. But let's pull back again that sort of image. Let's talk about the op that exists, because there's my buddy George Hill likes to talk about an operation, a psychological operation always has multiple layers. It's a pinwheel, but multiple different layers. The inside wheel's going clockwise. The next wheel's going counterclockwise. The one outside of that back clockwise again. And so you're constantly spinning things against themselves to disguise the true nature of the op. We're looking at a lot of spin whenever we think about January 6th. There's a mainstream narrative that Nancy Pelosi and company have sort of posited, right? There's a counter narrative that has been posited by the people on the hard right that just don't care about the facts, and these people were murdered and everybody's a political prisoner, and so these are very also simple. And then you get more and more nuanced and subtle, I think, as you get further out, as you kind of put on your skeptic hat, let's call it. Somebody who's been looking at this for 4 years straight. Do you have an overwhelming sense of what you think happened if you were going to try to explain it to grandchildren? This is what happened on January 6, 2021.
Yeah, I've been saying this for years. They got their timing off. They showed their hand by not calculating that Trump was going to be an hour late starting his speech that day. It starts there. He took the stage at 11:57. He was supposed to begin his remarks at 11 a.m. So he's, 3 minutes shy of an hour late to take the stand. Well, all of the provocateurs, the antagonists, were already on the move because the schedule says that those side stages were supposed to begin at 1:00 at the Capitol. The march was supposed to precede that. Trump was supposed to speak for an hour from 11 to 12. Dismiss everyone, then the marches began, scheduled, permitted, legal marches, and then the side stage. There were 6 permits issued by the Capitol Police on the Capitol grounds that day, what they call and refer to as First Amendment protest events. And Trump was late. Trump did a Trump. And all the people that were already at the Capitol waiting didn't realize that the schedule had been shot to hell. So they breached the first barricade at 12:53 p.m. and Trump's still speaking. He hasn't told everybody to, insurrect yet, which he never did, but it's what they've claimed. He hadn't told them to, peacefully and patriotically go make your voices be heard. So they breach at 12:53, run over some cops, concuss Officer Carolyn Edwards. First blood was not the Capitol Police. It was first blood was by that front line of protesters on the first barricade line on the West Plaza.
Have those people all been convicted?
No. Oh, most of them haven't even been charged.
Have they been identified?
Almost all of them have been identified.
And is there a sedition hunter outcry that these people are not being charged?
Absolutely. On my own threads at 2:30 last night, I'm reading sedition hunters bitching about that.
Okay.
Yeah. They're
points for consistency.
Yep. They don't see the event through the same lens, but they're just as pissed off that there are people out there who they've identified to the FBI as far back as 3 years ago who've never been arrested. And these are people that are on the FBI's most wanted January 6th page and identified as AFOs, assault on federal officers.
Yep, that's an eeasy one.
And they still haven't been arrested yet.
Okay,
And,
I'm going to pin you down.
Yep.
Why do you think that is? What do you think what's the explanation for that?
There's only one answer, that they did not go after. We've had sedition hunters tag on Twitter the fucking FBI and say, I will give you his name and his home address. I can tell you what church he goes to. You can pick him up tomorrow. Why aren't you picking him up?
No response.
Of course not.
So why?
Kyle, there's only one answer to that question. There were paid provocateurs in that crowd, not necessarily paid by the FBI, but they were paid by somebody. And when I show my own videos, just my videos, I don't have to have the treasure trove of 41,000 hours from the Capitol. I can take them and show them my videos, special operators who have done this very thing overseas, and they point at over my shoulder, pointing at my computer screen and going, okay, this is what his job is. Watch him. As soon as he finishes, he leaves. He's done. He did his thing. He goes. And he disappears back into the crowd. Now, watch her. This is what her job is. Boom. How do you know this stuff? That's what we do. That's what we train people to do overseas. And what did Kash Patel say about Ray Epps? Let's bring up Ray Epps again. Ray Epps was number 16 on the FBI's most wanted list immediately after January 6th. Number 16. And then suddenly, him and several others disappeared off the list. What did Kash Patel say was the only possible? There's only two reasons that you disappear from the FBI list. You remember?
I don't. What are the two reasons?
You either die.
It's a good one. No longer necessary for prosecution.
Right. Or you're an informant.
For somebody.
And somebody dropped the DOJ a call and said, he's got to go. Pull him.
That means there's somebody that took that phone call at the Bureau.
That's correct.
This stuff, all of this stuff, if nothing else, just to explain, to debunk or to explain away accurately from people who can be trusted, because I don't think the current crop will do that. People who don't care. Somebody has to go in there that doesn't care what the answer is, like a real investigator. And unfortunately, and I actually shared this with Patel the other day. I said, Kash, you've assumed you've agreed to be in charge of a retard factory that is also a crime scene.
You're right.
Because we've got some really dumb people out there. We're seeing this right now in New Orleans, and some of the folks that have no business being in charge of anything. They just are not competent human beings. They were promoted basically because of either looks or because they said the right things, or because they never said no. And they put their hand up, and then they're the ones that are the least threatening to the current management crop, and that's fine. Those are the people. So that's the retard factory.
Was the nose ring girl, is she a ASAC or a SAC?
She's an ASAC.
She's an ASAC. All right. Mm-hmm. How do you go from seeing this on camera to seeing the rules, dress code rules for the FBI?
Well, those dress codes don't apply to her. That's the problem. This is the problem of misinformation. This is I read something on a piece of paper somewhere and I thought I knew what it meant.
Why don't they apply to her?
Because that rule, if you go look at what it says it's for basic field. What is it? It's called BF, Basic Field Training, BFTC, Basic Field Training Course. That's Quantico.
Okay,
that's the new agent training.
Right.
It only applies to the academy. There's
once you're out of the academy,
as of 2010, from the last time that I saw it, the last time that there was a dress and appearance code for the FBI was in 2010. It was revoked. It was revoked via memo internally. It's for agents who are doing the job. There's always different rules in the academy. You have to show up on a certain time. That's not the case for your job when you show up in the field. You show up when your job needs you to be there. Your job is all the time,
right.
The end. So I got called at 3 a.m. I got called at, midnight. I got called at 8 p.m. after a full day. That's just the job. But that's not the case for the academy. The academy has very rigid hours for various things. If they're going to go outside those hours, they have to notify you and so on. And you have to show up with no beard. You can't have a beard at the academy. I have a beard when I'm working on surveillance every day. I had a beard working CI. So those dress and appearance standards do not exist anymore. So when you're looking at things, now, is having a nose ring an appropriate reflection of an FBI ASAC? No, of course not. But the person who makes that decision, that's the factory of people that you've put in there.
Right.
She also has no background. She's running. Here's the optics of that for you, Steve, because I look at it with a different eye as well.
Sure.
I come in from more like your guys from the operator end of things. I'm looking at my people.
Yeah.
She's wearing a BAU sweatshirt or hoodie. Did you see that? It's a fleece of some kind. You know what BAU is?
No.
That's the behavioral analysis unit. That's the so-called profiler unit out of Quantico.
Okay.
And around it, it says the Critical Incident Response Group, CIRG. CIRG is the team that runs BAU. They run HRT, the hostage rescue team. They run SOG, the Special Operations Group. They run the SSG. These are the unarmed, non-agent surveillance group that does nothing but national security work. They run the pilots and the aviation units for the FBI. They run the drone program, which flies around and does surveillance drones. They run all that. That's what CIRG does. Why is she wearing a BAU? I don't know if it was part of her 954, her sort of bullet points of promotion, whether she worked over there and did a stint at CIRG, which she might have. She might have been dating a guy that was at BAU, for all I know. I mean, I just don't know why she's wearing it. But you put somebody out there after someone just did a terrorist attack in a major American city during a New Year's Eve event, right? And you got a nose ring on, you're wearing a hoodie fleece or a fleece instead of wearing a jacket, like a suit. So you're already looking pretty unprofessional. You're the ASAC because the SAC is out of town on vacation and hasn't made it back into the country yet. And you're going to go out there and speak. You're theoretically an expert on counterterrorism because you're the ASAC for the JTTF. And her background is that she spent a couple years working healthcare fraud and maybe dating a BAU guy for all I know. Or lady. I don't know what her orientation is. I don't know anything about her other than that. I mean, I didn't ask what her relationship status looks like. And you decided to show up with that. So you got nothing but conspiracies. Why is the behavioral analysis unit already there? Well, she's not from the behavior. She's assigned to the field office. She's just wearing a hoodie because she's an FBI agent who makes bad decisions. And she's wearing a nose ring because she makes bad decisions. And she makes bad decisions because no one's ever said, hey, that's a bad decision. You can't do that. You're no longer promoting because of your bad decision until you change your habits. And unfortunately, the people that are running out there with that DEI banner, you know what they're doing? They're making it about her being black.
Yeah, of course.
But it's not about her being black. It's about her being a woman and being able to never do any wrong and probably not ever being held accountable to a normal standard. That's what DEI is. It's like when they say didn't earn it, it's just because she didn't belong there. I talked to a half dozen people that said she's a blue flamer, which is an FBI climber, somebody who just cared about position and not about work, not about the real work, the mission of the Bureau. So, it's always this mixed bag. That's what the op is always interesting. And that's why I'm curious about when you say, I think that this thing happened, that the timeline got off. That seems sober to me. It's far more sober than saying it's a Fedsurrection.
Yeah, well,
I didn't hear you assign blame to a certain group of people or a certain agency. No,
I haven't yet, have I?
Do you have an incident? You have an instinct of what it looks like?
I mean, I have my belief of what happened. I believe that well, first of all, in order to keep a conspiracy like this very quiet and very tight, it has to be very tight.
Correct.
We're talking about only 3 to 5 people in the know.
Agreed.
And the rest of them are paid enough money that they don't give a shit if they go to jail for a couple of years.
Okay, I agree.
All right. So that's what's important. And you're either paid enough money or your life will be much, much worse off if you talk.
Right. Yeah, that's family members dying. That's you no longer have a credit record. Your business disappears. You're going to live in you're going to be looking for food, or you're going to be institutionalized. Something. Yeah, I get it. So
an hour and a half ago, I said there was a name I'm not prepared to reveal yet. But I will tell you that somebody involved in this has told him that if he talks, they will kill him.
Okay.
Very point blank. Oh no. So-and-so will kill me if I talk. So you will not even go forward on deep background. Nope. And he named the name of the person that would kill him. And when you go back and you trace it, you see that where their connection was.
Okay.
And you see where they operated together in the past. And you see how he got his current status and his current job at running security at Trump events. You hear what I just said? Oops.
There's going to be some people digging into some backgrounds now.
I hope they do. That's why we're dropping this. That's why we're dropping this story without conclusions. And we're not saying we have conclusions. We're saying this is what exists in the real world right now today. This is what our government has access to. And we can tell you when it was used, and we can tell you that we don't know if it was used. And we can tell you who was there and who all evidence says was probably there, but we don't have photos of them. But here's what their capabilities are. And here's what they do around the world as their profession. And this is exactly what that looks like on January 6, 2021.
What do you expect in the 2025, 2026 around America? We had a pretty interesting, eventful January 1st already. What do you see coming down looking into the crystal ball?
You know, that's a great question. And I've actually spent a lot of time on that.
Some of it's personal, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I've spent a lot of time on it up here. All evidence says that because of what happened on January 6th, that most people are probably going to want to avoid a recurrence of anything that looks similar to that from either side.
Sure.
There's wild cards out there, though, as we know. Antifa doesn't really give a rat's ass, but their numbers aren't large enough to create a January 6th style event. You know, you get these idiots like Tony Saruga out there who's, oops, sorry, did I say that? These guys that post and say that they tracked 120,000 Antifa had arrived from all over the world in Chicago.
God, he's really
the
bad.
DNC. That's what he said. It was like, 70,000 one day, then it was 80, then it was 90, and there was 120,000 Antifa in Chicago. I was there the whole week. I was there. I saw a dozen Antifa one time, and they ran scared because the police presence in D.C. was unlike anything you have ever seen in your life.
This is at the DNC, you mean?
At the DNC in Chicago. This past summer.
Well, this
never
is the same
seen
guy.
a police presence like that.
And I don't know if that guy is just a clickbait chaser or if he's just an operative or what he's got going on. But like, that's the same guy that said that he traced an FBI cell phone, which is illogical as all get out, from the water tower at Butler in PA on July the 13th, and then traced it down a zip line. I don't know how you do that using telemetry when you have nothing but cell phone data, but that's the claim. Down a zip line, which apparently was like 300 yards long, which would weigh thousands of pounds to be able to support a man's weight. Right. And then trace that zip line down to a DHS registered vehicle. That was a black SUV. I don't know how you know what color it was based on the data that's on the cell phone data, but whatever. And then that person escaped, and that was the grassy knoll shooter, when you never needed any of that information. And you notice we're not talking about Trump assassination anymore. Things have been so wild in the last, let's call it 6 months. This is why I'm really curious about, I don't even know how we predict about 2025. Right. It's been so, like, I mean, we had an attempted assassination that involved an actual head hit of a round. And not even everybody in America agrees that he got shot. Yeah. Including the FBI director for a while.
Right. Apparently.
I mean, we're living in a we're off the map at this point. I feel like, Steve.
We are, and that's why
it's nice that you have a map behind you.
That's why, that's why I say I've given it a lot of time up here in my head, and I really don't have any predictions or prophecies or conclusions or prognostications or anything. Like I said, Antifa doesn't really give a shit what people think about them. The pro-Palestinian groups that have been very vocal for the last several months since Israel attacked against Hamas after October 7th. They have been violent. very, very active and very violent in some instances. So violent in such ways in DC against Capitol Police officers that we're able to actually show the actual selective prosecution and weaponization of government against J6ers, as opposed to people that beat up cops and drug cops across the concrete and then had their charges dismissed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's I can point to that and say, and you prosecuted me and put me through hell for 3.5 years because why? But you dismissed that guy's case because he wore the right kind of scarf. Maybe.
Yep. Yeah.
Explain that to me, Judge Cooper.
I wish you would.
Yeah,
I do.
I was going to use the transcript that I acquired for my trial hearing, which ended up not being a trial, to write an open letter to the judge, and Shipley is go, no, you can't do that. That's ex parte communication. He said, you can write an article, and you can write it about Cooper. Just don't write an open letter to Cooper. He said, now, if you get the pardon and it all goes away, all right, fair game.
Game on.
But not now.
I do pray for that for you. I pray for that for all, and let's end on the pardon topic, because I know I talked to JD Rivera about this the other day. I've talked to people like Sean Witzman. I will have him on the program as well. He can share his own ideas on it. There's a divide in the so-called J6 community about blanket pardons, commuting the sentence. Where do you land on what you think is going to be the just outcome and why?
Am I the judge of all 1,600 defendants in this scenario?
Yeah, you're sitting there and you're the advisor to Trump, and he's going to take what you say very heavily. What are you advising him? We ended with a role play, Steve. We ended with a role play. We started with a role play. I didn't plan that, but here you go.
If I was wearing the gown and the the British wig,
you're the advisor. You're the concierge of the. Yeah. What do they call that? What's the guy? You're the Grand Vizier. You sit there and you give the inside scoop, and the emperor's going to do his thing.
Consigliere?
Yeah, consigliere.
Anyway, that's the mafia. Anyway, DOJ, mafia, same thing. Anyway, so when I act upon my emotions, hell no, Jake Lang's not getting pardoned. And a few dozen others. All right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But think about everything we've talked about for the last 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the fact that the system has been so perverted. If they lied about Ken Harrelson, and they lied about me in my statement of facts, they use as an example, intended to show it to a judge or a jury, that I said words such as, for instance, dang, I wish I had stole Nancy Pelosi's laptop. Can you imagine what I would have learned about the government from that? That's what FBI Special Agent Craig Noyes, the affiant who signed my statement of facts, that's what he told the government in their recommendation to prosecute me, is that because my intent was there to steal government property, that I must have been there to join the mob. He didn't bother to put in there that the very next sentence was, unfortunately, I saw that Pelosi's office had been ransacked, so I got the hell out of there. It was the first time I'd seen, property damage inside the Capitol. He also failed to mention that I'm sitting there with my best friend with an adult beverage in my hand, and we just watched it on television where it had been reported that Nancy Pelosi's laptop had been stolen. And we were joking about it, going, God, I wish I'd have stole the laptop. Context means everything. Wish I'd have stole it. Can you imagine what I'd have learned about the government then? In context, what the hell do I do? I'm an investigative reporter, and I report on the government. Imagine what I could learn about the government from that laptop. Joking with a bourbon in my hand.
After the fact.
in my hotel room in Virginia. Not in D.C., not at the Capitol, joking with my best friend.
It's the argument against, how do you know Donald Trump's not going to become a dictator? It's because he already apparently had the opportunity and he chose not to be. That's all. So I go to past performance. So in your emotional way, emotional way.
So if I take my preconceptions, my emotions, and everything out of the way, and then I also show and I run it through the filter of the perversion of justice, of the weaponized nature of the government, of the provocateurs that were in the crowd that day, maybe even with these little devices that make people control in manners that they would never have controlled. They never would have behaved at any other time in their life, except under that influence, then I go to John Adams. Period. I finished my advice to the president is very simply this. As John Adams told the jury when he was arguing in defense of the British soldiers that were being tried for the Boston Massacre, and he said, I'd much rather 5 guilty go free than 1 innocent suffer. And then he referenced others who had used the number 10 guilty. And then, of course, we've heard as many as others say that they would prefer 100 guilty go free than 1 innocent suffer. Mr. President, Mr. Trump, that's my advice to you. Blanket pardon. Let them all go.
You get the final word on that.
Even the ones I don't like.
It's a fair discussion, and I'm not going to challenge it. I'm just going to leave it where it is. That's your take. That's your opinion, and I appreciate you coming and sharing your opinion. The facts that the interpretation thereof. Wild time in American history. I really do pray that 2025 is the end of this chapter for this transformation for you, as this little turn. I hope that we see an interesting 5th movement in the Steve Baker saga. I expect that I will be in touch with you when that happens. Tell people one more time where to follow you so we can keep that going, because this is not done. Obviously, it's definitely not done.
All social media, and my locals blog is at TPC4USA. Facebook, TPC4US, Steve Baker. I'm sorry, it's facebook.com/TPC, the number 4USA, X at TPC4USA, locals, TPC4USA, and then, of course, my own unique URL at The Blaze is theblaze.com/truth. But I've been really honored and blessed by those guys over the last few months. They're seemingly allow me to kind of ramrod and steer into my own creating a show direction on Blaze TV under the Blaze News Tonight brand. As you know, you were one of my first guests on that series, and we've like with the one we did with Casey Wardensky, former Secretary of the Army, that just was a home run. And then my last one that just came out last week was the former bassist for Toto and Kenny Loggins and Christopher Cross and Ambrosia and Michael McDonald, among others.
That's so
He's like
good.
the yacht rock bassist, to the yacht rock stars. Toured extensively with all those guys, including Don Felder of the Eagles, and he also, Ray Epps happened to be his handyman.
Whoa. Yeah, that's a cool story.
Is it? I mean, how's that for a punchline? So yeah, that one just came out on Friday. Everybody can get that on YouTube for free. Just go to the Blaze News Tonight on YouTube, and you'll see it. It's trending up there, so you won't have to dig far. But you'll find my interview with Shim von Schreck. It's the Toto bassist who Ray Epps was his handyman.
A weird, small little world we're living in, Steve.
Isn't it?
Also, I'm a big Toto fan, which is funny to me, just because growing up, I probably only knew one song. As I got older, I appreciate a lot more of their music. They're
right.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for spending. I think we set a new record for us sitting and talking. We're darn close, if not. Thanks for sharing this time with me. The The audience can find all those links that you just said. They'll be down in the show description. So all you got to do is see more if you're watching over on Rumble, folks, or if you're watching over on Spotify, and if you happen to be on YouTube, so on, before we get banned, then it'll be over there. And then you can also expand it out in the Apple and that kind of stuff, all those little notes. But thank you for joining me, my friend. I look forward to doing this again with an interesting wrap up. We'll see if your predictions come true. We'll see if Trump takes your advice. And God bless you.
Thank you, Kyle. You too. Happy New Year.
All right, buddy. Happy New Year. Happy 2025.
And that was our Sunday special. Thanks for joining us. I know it was a long one. I hope it was entertaining. I hope it was interesting. And I hope that you learned something. If you have any knowledge that you want to pass on to Steve Baker, you guys know where to find him. It's at TPC, the number 4 USA, link in the show description below. Usually X is the best way to find him. And that's one of the great ways to find us. You can also find us at rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin, where you can share this video, and you can subscribe, repost it if you want to. You can always find us on the locals channel, which is kyleseraphin.com, to sign up and be part of that community. And if you want to share a video with someone who's using Spotify, you can do that. We're on Apple, we're on YouTube, and so on and so forth. Thanks so much for being part of this. This is really an interesting little experiment for me. It's a lot of work on the editing end because I'm just not that good at it, but I hope you liked it. Whatever you have to say, whether it be a question, a comment, a sarcastic remark, I'll take all comers. Send it on over whatever platform you're listening on, and I'll try to get a look at it and respond as well. Have a blessed Sunday. Have a wonderful week. If you're listening to the week, thanks so much for listening a little bit later on, and join us at 0930 Eastern Time, the Kyle Seraphin Show, the normal commentary, Monday morning. See you then, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.